Chapter 730. When Xiao Jing of Duke Xing returned to his mansion, he went directly to old Madame's Ximing pavilion. Hearing that Madame of Duke Xing had returned to her own Yingyue pavilion, he went directly to Yingyue pavilion with his servants. In the main room, Madame of Duke Xing was lying on the bed. She felt better after taking the medicine, so she was in the mood to think about what had happened today. Nanny Sheng was her right-hand woman and could be said to be her most trusted person. Now she had to cut her off, so how could she feel comfortable? She often communicated with honored consort Shu through Nanny Sheng in the palace. Now Nanny Sheng was dead. Who should she contact next? Was the poison given by honored consort Shu related to what had happened in the palace before? Madame of Duke Xing frowned. She also had complaints about honored consort Shu. She just wanted an ordinary, effective, chronic poison that was not easy to be detected. How could honored consort Shu do that? How could honored consort Shu give her such an obvious poison? Wasn't this pushing her to the teeth of the storm? The current matter was very difficult. She originally thought that since something had happened to her, and it happened after the meal, they would definitely investigate the meal. It was impossible for them to investigate her immediately. As long as things slowed down a little, she would ask Nanny Sheng to find another place to destroy the oiled paper. Unexpectedly, they didn't investigate the canteen at that time, but directly investigated her, even the back of the ancestral hall. As a result, she was in a mess and had to push Nanny Sheng out. In fact, she had no other choice. Although the crisis was over for the time being, she couldn't get in touch with honored consort Shu for the time being. Something had happened to her, and she couldn't inform honored consort Shu quickly. How could she not be anxious? Next, who should be her most trusted person to deal with the extremely secretive things around her? Madame of Duke Xing couldn't think of it for a moment. Suddenly, she thought of Xiao Yanru's performance and felt very angry. Her daughter didn't mean to help her at all. If she had said a few more words just now that it had something to do with Xiao Wanru, she might have come up with a good way to push the blame to Xiao Wanru. But what should she do now? She was really unwilling to let Xiao Wanru escape. She came out of the ancestral hall, and now she was the victim. It was impossible for Duke Xing's mansion to watch her be killed in the ancestral hall again, which was what she had expected. But her body was also injured. Just now, she really felt that her body was very uncomfortable. This was also why her face was ashen. Color is one of the most important reasons. At this time, even though he had taken the medicine and felt slightly better, he still felt cold all over, his chest felt stuffy, and his throat felt nauseous. It was a feeling that he couldn't spit it out, nor could he swallow it. His head was dizzy, and he couldn't calm down and think of an idea at all. The door was suddenly kicked open, and Duke Xing, who was round and chubby, barged in with a cold and angry face. The servant girl beside the bed was so frightened that her face turned pale. She was about to step forward and bow. Scram! Duke Xing waved his hand. The servant girl did not dare to say more. She trotted out of the door and closed it for them. Duke Xing walked to the bed and looked at Madame of Duke Xing coldly. Madame of Duke Xing involuntarily avoided his eyes and murmured, "Duke." This sentence seemed to wake Duke Xing up. He reached out to grab Madame of Duke Xing's collar, directly pulled her out of the bed, and threw her hard to the ground. Madame of Duke Xing didn't expect that Duke Xing would really take action. She was thrown out and her body hit the foot of the table heavily, which made her curl up in pain. The cups and teapots on the cups were knocked down, and one even broke beside her. The fragments flew over and scratched her face, which made her subconsciously cover her face in pain. When she put down her hand, she immediately found that there was blood on her hand and screamed in fear. Duke Xing seemed to not see Madame of Duke Xing's suffering. He stared at Madame of Duke Xing with his cold eyes, which were like those of a poisonous snake. At this time, there were no outsiders, so he did not intend to pretend. "Well, how dare you poison yourself? Do you want to die? If you want to die, just say it. I will strangle you now." As Duke Xing said, he reached out to lift Madame of Duke Xing and pushed her to the edge of the bed. His hands fell together, and he pinched her neck hard and exerted force. Madame of Duke Xing kicked Duke Xing crazily with her hands and feet, and her eyes were full of anger. The feeling of suffocation in her neck not only made her unable to speak, but also made her almost unable to breathe. She even felt dizzy. She saw the murderous intent in Duke Xing's eyes, which was not concealed at all. She struggled hard to get out of this predicament. Naturally, she wanted to survive. She couldn't die like this. Her daughter was going to be the empress. She would be the empress's biological mother and look down on all the madams with honorary titles. As her neck was loosened, Madame of Duke Xing gasped heavily. Her throat was burning with pain, and her chest felt as if it was being pricked by needles. But all this also made her know clearly that she was still alive and not dead. Tears fell down one by one. She tried to calm down and then looked up at Duke Xing, who was looking at her with a gloomy face. This was her husband, but now he just looked at her coldly and felt sad. Even her sadness just now was caused by him. She felt a tightness in her chest and a fishy taste in her throat. She spat out a mouthful of blood, which dripped on the clean carpet in front of her, and the plain carpet was immediately polluted. Jiang Wanyan, do you think you are so smart that others don't know what you have done? You drugged yourself. You even got Nanny Xing killed. Duke Xing sneered as if he didn't see the blood on the corner of her mouth. I had no choice. If I had a choice, would I do this? I drugged myself and hurt myself. Now I have hurt my body. Madame of Duke Xing burst into tears. She had pretended to cry in old Madame's yard before, but now she was really crying. She was full of grievances. What good will it do for if I enter the ancestral hall? Is going to enter the palace for the consort selection. If people know that her mother is locked in the ancestral hall, how will others think of her? How will the empress think of her? How can she get the position of the princess consort? I have to come out of the ancestral hall to help her, but you turned a blind eye to me. If I hadn't been forced to do this, how could I have done this to myself? Madame of Duke Xing cried and coughed. Blood was still dripping down the corners of her lips, which made her look extremely miserable. However, Duke Xing disliked her so much. They had been husband and wife for so many years, so how could he not know that Madame of Duke Xing was the best at pretending? He remembered that he had thought it was good to marry this cousin of his at that time, but now he was full of regret. No matter who he married at that time, it would be better than Madame of Duke Xing now. At least she would not drag him down. Why don't you die? If you die, may have a dead mother. He raised the corner of his mouth sarcastically. This smile made people feel cold, and Madame of Duke Xing's hair stood on end. She knew that Duke Xing was really angry. Even if she had some courage in the past, she did not dare to annoy him at this time. Duke, if I really die, will not be able to attend the consort selection, and she will have to observe mourning for me for 3 years. If it weren't for I would be willing to die. Madame of Duke Xing cried. What she said was the truth. If she died at this time, both of her children would have to observe mourning. Now was different from the past. No one knew what would happen if they missed the 3 years. You're on your own. Duke Xing knew that what she said was right, but seeing that she was getting angrier, he flicked his sleeves, turned around, and strode out, ignoring Madame of Duke Xing, who was lying on the ground and covered with blood. This matter not only caused the affairs of his own backyard, but also caused the people of the Ministry of Justice to come to ask about it. He had to take care of it, lest the people of the Ministry of Justice find out other things in his mansion. Guards, are they all dead? Hurry up and come in. After Duke Xing left, Madame of Duke Xing's hysterical scream came from the main room, which scared the maids and old maids outside and made them look at each other, not daring to go in for a while. In the end, 2 of the most trusted servant girls carefully walked in. The red plum blossoms in the yard were in good shape. Xiao Wanru asked Yujie to carry an empty high-necked beauty vase to the garden and wanted to put some beautiful red plum blossoms in it. However, she didn't see anything satisfactory along the way. Fortunately, there were no other people appreciating the plum blossoms at this time. Xiao Wanru wandered freely among the plum trees and looked at the plum blossoms she had chosen from different angles. When she felt that all the plum blossoms were good, she picked them off. Up to now, she had only picked 2. After the incident of Madame of Duke Xing, it seemed that everyone in the mansion became quiet all of a sudden. Nanny, she hadn't come back yet. She should have been left in the imperial palace by the empress. Without an etiquette instructor, the misses stayed in their own courtyards. After such a big incident, no one was in the mood to go out for a stroll in the garden. Xiao Wanru benefited from this. She really didn't want to see Xiao Yenru's hypocritical face. Xiao Yenru always put on a hypocritical face, which made people feel uncomfortable and spoiled her good mood. Miss, can't you find out what happened to Nanny Sheng? Seeing that Xiao Wanru was really focused on picking plum blossoms, Yujie finally couldn't bear it anymore after a while. Of course we can find out something, but I don't know how much we can find out. Xiao Wanru said leisurely. What she could do was to lead people to the imperial palace. What would happen in the imperial palace next was out of her control. What will happen? Yujie said uneasily. What will happen? I heard that she is seriously ill. Several doctors have been invited to treat her, and even the imperial physicians in the imperial palace have been alarmed. Xiao Wanru said unhurriedly. Since the imperial physicians in the imperial palace had been alarmed, it meant that Madame of Duke Xing was not pretending this time. Will they find out that it was she who did it? They will find out, but the person who found it knows about it. But it will be difficult for her to recover now. Xiao Wanru said with a slight smile and tiptoed to pick a plum blossom she liked. Although the poison was slow-acting and had been discovered early, Madame of Duke Xing couldn't give her too much of it. However, the poison was actually very potent, so it was not easy to diagnose and treat. Otherwise, it would not have been used in the imperial palace at that time. She picked the plum blossom and looked around. As expected, it was not bad. She turned around and inserted it into the vase in Yujie's hand. Suddenly, a figure flashed across her eyes. She turned her head again and looked at the pavilion in the depths of the plum blossom forest. There was someone there. And he was still looking at her just now. Chapter 731. The plum blossom forest of Duke Xing's mansion was actually not big. The pavilion was on the other side of the plum blossom forest, which was a little far from where she had just come in. In the middle of winter, there was a curtain hanging outside, facing them. The curtain was slightly raised, and someone was standing in the pavilion. They couldn't see who it was, but one thing was for sure, that person seemed to be walking in their direction. Miss, there seems to be someone over there. Yujie also found the person in the pavilion over there. Although she couldn't see his face, she could be sure that he was a man because she could see his dark robe. Let's go. Xiao Wanru shook her head and motioned her not to look. No matter who the person over there was, since he was a man, it was not very convenient. Okay. Yujie nodded and followed Xiao Wanru with the vase in her arms. They walked back together and then disappeared behind the plum blossom forest. When Shichi looked at Xiao Wanru's back through the gauze curtain. After a long while, he reached out and rubbed his eyebrows, feeling very uncomfortable. He couldn't describe the feeling. He came to Duke Xing's mansion today for routine business, mainly to ask about the poisoning of Madame of Duke Xing. Because it was related to a matter in the imperial palace of the late emperor, the emperor asked him to come over and have a look. He didn't officially go to the Ministry of Justice to file a record. The poisoning of a madam of a noble family seemed to be more like a matter in the backyard. However, because the poison was a little special, it would be best if he could find out something. It didn't matter if he couldn't find anything. After all, it happened during the late emperor's reign. The imperial harem at that time was not the imperial harem of the current emperor. Because when Shichi lived next door to Duke Xing's mansion, the officials of the Ministry of Justice asked him to go there. He first visited Madame of Duke Xing and asked a few questions. Xiao Hua, then, the first young master of Duke Xing's mansion, took him to the courtyard. After walking for a while, a servant suddenly came over and whispered a few words to Xiao Hua, then. Xiao Hua apologized to him and asked him to wait for a while before going out. There happened to be a pavilion in front of him. He stood in the pavilion and admired the scenery of the plum blossom forest. He didn't expect to see Xiao Wanru appear in the plum blossom forest with her servant girl. He silently watched Xiao Wanru look around under the plum blossom tree to find a suitable plum blossom branch, and saw her talking to the servant girl beside her from time to time. Although he couldn't hear what they were talking about from a distance, he could tell that she seemed to be in a good mood. Her usually cold face was smiling from time to time. The young girl with exquisite facial features stood in the middle of the plum blossom forest, but the entire plum blossom forest became the background behind her. She was more beautiful than a flower. When Shichi had always disdained to use sentences from books to describe women, but now he inexplicably felt that the vocabulary he had learned was too few. No matter how many beautiful words there were, they could not compare to the beautiful scenery under the tree in front of him, as if there was such a scene in the depths of his memory. Xiao Hua, who walked among the blossom branch, saw Xing, and looked back occasionally. Blossoms Hua. Which Xing's heart? He reached out and pressed his chest. His heart was beating much faster than usual, but he couldn't explain why. He felt a little annoyed. He had a vague feeling that he couldn't control it, which made him feel extremely uncomfortable. The poisoning of Madame of Duke Xing, disappeared silently in the end, as if nothing had happened. Occasionally, someone heard the news, but they only said that Madame of Duke Xing seemed to be poisoned by someone, and it was a kind of poison that had been used in the palace. Madame of Duke Xing was fine, but she was not in good health. She disliked the noise in Duke Xing's mansion, so she took a few servant girls to the Yuhui nunnery to live for a period of time to recuperate. As for Nanny Xing's death, who would care how an old maid died and what crime she was charged with? The people from the Ministry of Justice also came to ask about it, but they only asked about it. There was no victim, and no one felt wronged. This matter was just a formality, and it was not filed with the Ministry of Justice, nor was it recorded. It was almost peaceful outside the palace. Even if Madame of Duke Xing went to the Yuhui nunnery to recuperate, she didn't disturb others. She got up early, and even the shops on the street were not open. But some people said that they saw Madame of Duke Xing's carriage. It was so simple that it didn't look like the carriage of a Madame of Duke Xing. It looked like the most common oil-walled carriage in an aristocratic family. If they hadn't heard that Madame of Duke Xing left early in the morning, no one would have thought that Madame of Duke Xing was sitting in the carriage. However, there was another saying that Madame of Duke Xing was in poor health. This time, she went up the mountain to recuperate quietly and avoid noise. Naturally, she couldn't go forward in a big carriage, which would disturb others and herself. Duke Xing's mansion was completely quiet because of Madame of Duke Xing's trip, but the palace was not quiet. Honored consort Shu was dead. And she committed suicide by drowning herself. It was said that she couldn't get over it. But there was no news from the palace about why she couldn't get over it. Honored consort Shu's family was only allowed to go in and have a look. After that, the emperor and the empress both rewarded them, and then there was no news. Honored consort Shu originally had no children, and now she was not favored. In addition, her paternal family originally did not have any power. Although her position was not low, the fact that she had no children and no favor caused her to be neglected in the palace. Even the new favored concubine did not pay much attention to her. Honored consort Shu could be regarded as an old servant of the emperor when he was in the emperor's mansion. She committed suicide inexplicably, and the emperor couldn't find anything after investigating. Although some ministers submitted a memorial to the empress to investigate again and proposed to invite all the people in the harem to investigate carefully one by one, the emperor rebuked them angrily. His harem didn't need the idle ministers to keep an eye on it. At this time, the Imperial Institute of Medicine sent a memorial, which could be considered a good explanation for honored consort Shu's death. The reason why honored consort Shu didn't want to live was that honored consort Shu had a hidden disease that couldn't be cured. She was in a bad mood and was depressed. On the day of the accident, she had a quarrel with another concubine who had just entered the palace. She couldn't get over it, so she committed suicide by drowning herself. The Imperial Institute of Medicine's memorial immediately made the whole imperial court quiet, and no one stared at the emperor's harem anymore. The concubine in the harem was sick all year round, depressed, quarreled with the arrogant new concubine, and had an accident. This kind of thing happened in all dynasties, and there was no way to investigate it. However, the new concubine didn't have a good time and was directly put into the cold palace by the empress. She had just entered the palace, but she treated the old concubine in the palace so arrogantly. Moreover, she was a high-ranking concubine, which was originally rebellious. All these things were passed to Xiao Wanru through Qing. Of course, Qing deliberately said in the end that consort Shu had an accident. The reason why consort Shu had an accident was that the poisonous powder in the hands of Madame of Duke Xing was obtained from her. It was said that the emperor personally asked about this matter, and later the empress ordered someone to give her 3 feet of white silk. As for why this matter was found to be related to honored consort Shu, Qing didn't know. She felt that someone must have done something. As for honored consort Shu's death, Xiao Wanru laughed it off. Although she didn't pay much attention to honored consort Shu, she had plotted against her twice with Duke Xing's mansion, so she really didn't like her. Did she really think that she was invincible in the harem when she stirred up trouble like this? Now she had reaped what she had sown. In her last life, she had never seen honored consort Shu in the palace. She thought that honored consort Shu should have had an accident before she entered the palace. It was normal for honored consort Shu to seek her own death because she was so powerful and had no background. As for Madame of Duke Xing, she was forced to go to the Yuhui nunnery, which was both expected and unexpected. Madame of Duke Xing thought that she could hide all the evidence from others by pushing it on Nanny Sheng, but she couldn't hide it from Xiao Jing. Old Madame might have been deceived at that time. How could she not punish Madame of Duke Xing after she realized it? She directly sent the evidence to Madame of Duke Xing while Madame of Duke Xing was not in good health. This was originally an excuse used by the madams and misses of aristocratic families when they committed crimes. This time, Madame of Duke Xing failed to steal a chicken and lost a grain of rice. "Miss, Nanny, she won't come back. It has been several days." Different from Qing, Yujie was concerned about another thing. "She won't come back." Xiao Wanru shook her head and narrowed her eyes slightly. After such a thing happened, no matter how low-key Duke Xing's mansion was, many aristocratic families secretly guessed that if Nanny Shi came back at this time, she would definitely cause a lot of trouble for Duke Xing's mansion, which was not what the Empress and Duke Xing's mansion wanted to see. Duke Xing's mansion needed to keep a low profile now, and the Empress also wanted to be impartial. In the past, when no one paid special attention to Duke Xing's mansion, she could privately send her nanny to give special treatment to the miss of Duke Xing's mansion and even suppress Xiao Wanru. At this time, everyone's attention fell on Duke Xing's mansion, so the Empress would not interfere anymore. "That's great. You don't have to learn from her from morning to night in the future. Miss has learned the rules very well." Yu Jie was very happy. She really thought that Miss had nothing to learn from Nanny Shi. Miss had learned the rules very well, so Nanny Shi couldn't find fault with Miss no matter how picky she was. Xiao Wanru smiled faintly but didn't say anything. There was never the best in the imperial palace, only better. Moreover, no matter how well you learned the rules, if someone found fault with you and said that you didn't learn well, could you still argue with the people in the imperial palace? If you argued with them, you would be insensible and even be punished. She remembered that she had been punished because of improper salutation. Under the hot sun, Xiao Yenru sent someone to make her bow sideways until she couldn't stand and fainted. Xiao Yenru also asked her to apologize to Xiao Yenru the next day. The imperial palace had never been a place of reason. The winter this year was so cold that Xiao Wanru didn't want to go out. Fortunately, the whole Duke Xing's mansion seemed to be extremely quiet this year. Everyone seemed to want to have a peaceful new year and didn't intend to make trouble. Although it was the first time for the third madam to take charge of the affairs of Duke Xing's mansion, it was basically in good order. As for the absence of Madam of Duke Xing, everyone gradually accepted it. They only said that Madam of Duke Xing was in poor health now and it was of great benefit to her to recuperate in the Yuhui nunnery. Naturally, they couldn't let her work too hard. As soon as the new year arrived, the draft was launched. Originally, it had been prepared early. As long as the candidates entered the imperial palace according to the list, it would be fine. Because there were 4 misses in Duke Xing's mansion who were going to enter the imperial palace for the draft, the originally desolate mansion became lively. Old Madam would reward them from time to time, and she would also invite people from the garment workshops outside to enter the mansion directly to sew a few more sets of fitting clothes for the misses who were going to enter the imperial palace. On the 6th day of the first lunar month, when everyone was still visiting relatives, the candidates officially entered the imperial palace. Chapter 732. On the wide official road, the carriages all went to the palace gate one after another. There was an inspection at the palace gate, so the carriages moving in the direction of the palace gate moved very slowly. One end had reached the palace gate, while the other end was still on the street. Many people watched the bustle on both sides of the street. Seeing the carriages with the marks of their respective aristocratic families passing by, they pointed at them and talked. Duke Xing's mansion was the one who talked the most. On the one hand, it was because the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion had faintly become the first beauty. On the other hand, it was also because Duke Xing's mansion had been troubled recently and had a close relationship with the Yuhui nunnery outside the city. At first, it was the first Miss Xiao, then it was the 5th Miss Xiao, and now it was Madam of Duke Xing. No matter how they looked at it, there was something wrong. However, some things were too confidential. Under the suppression of several parties, ordinary people did not know. But this did not hinder the enthusiasm of the common people to watch the bustle. They all wanted to guess how beautiful the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion was. This time, she would definitely fall in love with the royal family, but they did not know which prince's mansion she would fall in love with. It was said that the first Miss Xiao was extremely beautiful. How could such a beauty not fall in love with the royal family? The carriage moved slowly. Xiao Wanru leaned against the side of the carriage with her eyes closed and was sleepy. She was called up early this morning, and now she felt sleepy because she had nothing to do. The misses of aristocratic families who participated in the draft took 1 carriage each. Duke Xing's mansion sent 4 carriages, and they entered the team according to their ranks. She was the last carriage of Duke Xing's mansion. At this time, the speed of the carriage was extremely slow. The window was hung with a light gauze curtain and a half-hung brocade curtain. The sound came from the outside and could be heard clearly. In particular, some loud voices were almost in the ears. Someone recognized the mark of Duke Xing's mansion and deliberately squeezed over to have a look. The reputation of the first beauty was well known. It was a blessing to see such a beauty. Therefore, more people crowded around their carriages and talked. Everyone wanted to see the first Miss Xiao, who was said to be extremely beautiful. Someone guessed that the carriage in the front should be the first Mrs., so there were the most people on her side. The carriages passed by one, attracting the crowd to watch. But in the end, they stopped at the intersection outside the palace gate. That section of the road was not allowed to watch the bustle, and there were no shops on both sides. At this section of the road, the voices of the idle people on both sides completely disappeared. Then, he slowly entered the palace. From the time they left home in the morning, 4 hours had passed by the time they arrived at the palace gate. Originally, it would only take them about an hour to reach the palace gate. Finally, the carriage entered the palace gate and stopped in the parking lot according to the regulations. 1 miss after another appeared at the door of the carriage with a maid. Xiao Wanru brought Yujie. A soft sedan chair was already waiting there. After the young ladies boarded the sedan chair, 2 eunuchs carried them into the depths of the palace. Xiao Wanru was not sleepy at this time. She half lifted the curtain and looked outside. After looking for a while, she felt that the scenery in front of her was familiar. In her last life, although she was not a candidate for the consort selection in the palace, the candidates often came here. It was time to arrive at the palace where the candidates lived. Finally, the sedan chair stopped, and Yujie stepped forward to help Xiao Wanru out. Xiao Wanru had been sitting in either a carriage or a sedan chair along the way, and her whole body felt soft. Xiao Wanru stood still with the help of Yujie and narrowed her eyes to look around. It was indeed the palace where the consort selection had taken place. In fact, this area was not a palace. There was a place for the candidates to live in the palace, called Chushio Palace, which was composed of several different palaces. Although it was only a palace name, there were many small courtyards in it, and the houses were stacked one after another. It had always been the place where the consort selection took place. Most of the S in the palace entered the palace through this way of consort selection. Of course, this also meant that the princes' marriages were also like this. The main purpose of this consort selection was the marriages of the princes. It was the right time for the princes to get married at this time. The royal family had never married too early. When the consort selection took place 3 years ago, it was only said that the princes would get married first, but it was not said that they would get married. Now that the consort selection had taken place, there should be almost no more changes. Third sister, fourth sister, fifth sister, let's go together. Xiao Yanru came over and said softly. Duke Xing's mansion regarded her as the eldest, so it should be like this. The few of them nodded and followed behind her, waiting for their accommodations to be arranged. Xiao Yanru knew a lot of misses from aristocratic families. Although it was inconvenient to talk loudly at this time, they nodded and smiled at each other a lot. However, although their smiles were decent, they were not affectionate. Compared with Xiao Yanru, the most popular candidate selected, how could her competitors really be affectionate with her? Xiao Yanru smiled very appropriately. She led her sisters from Duke Xing's mansion to walk inside under the guidance of the palace maid. She took the number plate from a supervisor nanny and looked at the numbers on everyone's number plates. As expected, they were connected. A eunuch had been waiting by the side. Seeing that they had taken the number plate, he led them inside. It didn't take long for them to arrive at their rooms, which were relatively close to the gate of Chushio Palace. Such a residence was usually only available to the families of the real rich and powerful. It was convenient and well known. There happened to be 4 rooms in their row. Xiao Yanru chose the outermost room, and so on, Xiao Wanru chose the innermost room. They were a little tired and entered their rooms respectively. Xiao Wanru took Yujie to push open the slightly closed door and found that although there was only one room, it was divided into the outer room and the inner room, separated by a 4-fold screen. "Miss, how many rooms are there if they live like this?" Yujie looked inside and said in surprise. Not only was the room larger than she had imagined, but the decoration inside was also good. At first glance, she could tell that it was carefully decorated. When she stood outside the door just now, she also looked around and found that there were so many beauties living like this. It seemed that it was not enough. Just like the front room. The rooms in the back can be shared by 2 people or 4 people. Xiao Wanru walked in and said with a faint smile. In her last life, she had done paintings for the beauties. It should be the beauties of the generation 3 years later, so she knew a little about the affairs of the beauties. The high-status beauties were placed in a room closer to the main entrance, and the space was large, so one person could have one room. The lower-status beauties were placed in a room for 2 people, and the lowest was for 4 people. The misses of aristocratic families in the capital were also divided into 3, 6, and 9 ranks. But there would be another batch of people. Nanny she had told them before that the scale of the draft this time was large and even more. She implied that it was not only for the princes but also for some people in the imperial harem. Of course, Nanny Shi's words were vague, but Xiao Wanru had already understood the meaning. It seemed that not only the prince's legal wives and concubines would be selected this time, but also the S. In her last life, Xiao Yanru should have entered the imperial palace at this time, right? She didn't know why Xiao Yanru, who was full of confidence at that time, entered the imperial palace instead of the prince's mansion. In her last life, Xiao Yanru had a better reputation than in this life, and Duke Xing's mansion was also more prosperous. However, although she was favored in the imperial palace, she didn't get a high position. The position of Zhaoyi was not a high ranking. Could it be that there was something else that she didn't know? In this case, she would temporarily be a bystander in this life and see whether Xiao Yanru entered the imperial palace according to the rules in the last life or the prince's mansion she wanted to enter. After making up her mind, Xiao Wanru was not in the mood to have lunch and slept for a while. The room was very clean, so Yu Jie didn't need to clean it up. Lunch was also sent over by a specific little eunuch. After eating, it was placed at the door, and a little eunuch would come to collect it. It was very convenient. In the afternoon, the nanny in charge of Chuxiu Palace asked all the beauties to gather. Xiao Wanru had just woken up, dressed up in a hurry, and left Yu Jie in the room. She followed the palace maid who led the way and went out with Xiao Yanru and the others. At this time, they couldn't take the servant girl with them. In the garden, the nanny in charge of Chuxiu Palace kept a stern face, waiting for the beauties who came late, and scolded the last few. Xiao Wanru was one of the early ones. It was more cost-effective to live near than to live far away. She also saw that the few who were scolded lived far away. Although they were sweating profusely, they were still a little late. When all the beauties arrived, they were asked to line up in 5 lines and enter the room one by one. Xiao Wanru lowered her head and took a deep breath with her face turning slightly red. Although she had also participated in the talent show in her last life, she was just an outsider. Now it was her turn. Although others didn't know what they were checking, Xiao Wanru knew that about half of them had to pass this test. They checked whether there were diseases or scars on the bodies of the beauties. Those who were not good-looking were not allowed to pass this test. There were fewer people in front of them. Originally, Xiao Wanru stood in the front, so it was her turn after a few people. Xiao Wanru suppressed the panic in her heart, took a deep breath, and followed a palace maid into the room. There was only an extremely old nanny in charge in the room. Her slightly chubby face showed a bit of sternness. At first glance, she could tell that she was not a person who was easy to get along with. After entering the room, the door was closed. The window had already been closed, and the curtain was drawn. There were lights and heaters inside. When she entered the room, she immediately felt very warm, as if it were a different season from the weather outside. The palace maid had left, and Xiao Wanru couldn't help breathing quickly. Even though she had been reborn, she had never undressed in front of others. "Come here. Undress," the nanny said in a cold voice as if it was routine. Xiao Wanru gritted her teeth. She had to pass this test. She tried hard to overcome the obstacles in her heart, took 2 steps forward, and put her fingers on the edge of her clothes. Her fingers trembled. She knew that this test was to be undressed and checked, which was also the most embarrassing scene for the beauties in the talent show. "Hurry up," the nanny said impatiently. "Wait a minute." Chapter 733. Wait a minute. Xiao Wanru turned around in astonishment, only to see a nanny under the shadow of the lamp. There was a table over there, and behind the table sat an old nanny. She seemed to be much older than the previous nanny. She happened to be in the shadow of the lamp, and Xiao Wanru was flustered, so she didn't notice her. "Just take off your outer clothes." The old nanny looked up at Xiao Wanru and said gently. "What about the others?" The previous nanny froze for a moment and said at a loss. She had never encountered such a thing. "That's it," the old nanny said. The nanny in front didn't dare to say anything more. It was much easier to take off her outer clothes than to take them off completely. But even so, Xiao Wanru still blushed. The nanny who listened to the examination pressed her hands and legs a few times, and asked a few questions. After she finished answering, the nanny recorded the results of the examination and nodded to let her leave. After putting on her outer clothes again, Xiao Wanru retreated outside. She still felt that her face was burning. Fortunately, she only took off her outer clothes. Fifth miss. A happy voice came from the front. Xiao Wanru looked up and found that she had walked to a flower hall. The young ladies who had been examined were all gathered here. It was Zhang Qilan who spoke. Miss Zhang. Xiao Wanru calmed herself down and said with a smile. Zhang Qilan also stayed in the Yuhui nunnery for a period of time that day. During that time, the two of them were very close and had a good relationship. Xiao Wanru also appreciated Zhang Qilan's straightforward and lively temperament. You really came. Great, I was worried that you wouldn't come. Zhang Qilan took Xiao Wanru's hand and said affectionately, while taking her to a pavilion beside the flower hall to talk. There were two young ladies sitting together in the pavilion and chatting in a low voice. Seeing them come over, they nodded to them in a friendly manner. The two of them also smiled at the two young ladies and sat down on the other side of the fence. I thought you were still observing mourning. Zhang Qilan leaned over and pointed to the flower hall. There are too many people there. It's better here. Just now, because there were too many people, she deliberately came to the door to wait. The mourning period for my parents is coming up in 2 days. Xiao Wanru said softly. Although there were still a few days to go, it basically didn't count. After all, learning the rules and etiquette of the palace was not the real consort selection. It was just the first test to get rid of some unsuitable people. Moreover, the imperial family also knew about it. If they didn't say it, it meant that they approved it. What came next was the key. That's great. I thought it was boring, but now you're here. It's great. Zhang Qilan said happily, where do you live? I'll come and find you when I'm free, okay? Okay, I'm in the last room in the second row over there. Xiao Wanru reached out and pointed in the general direction. Zhang Qilan stood up and asked in the direction of Xiao Wanru's finger. Then she sat down again and nodded with a smile, great, I see. You see, we are actually quite close. I'm not far from you. I'm in the first room in that direction. If you have time, you can come and play with me. Zhang Qilan pointed with her right hand. Xiao Wanru looked in the direction and nodded. Zhang Qilan's father was Prime Minister Zhang. Naturally, his daughter couldn't live in the back with others. It was inevitable that she lived not far from her. Originally, the daughters of the important ministers of the court lived closer and better than the other manors. Are you okay? The two of them were very happy after reporting their positions. Zhang Qilan suddenly leaned over and pointed at the beauties who were still waiting in line with a red face. She said vaguely. Her words reminded Xiao Wanru of her own situation just now, and her face flushed again. I'm okay. It's not okay. It's better to go back to the mansion early. Zhang Qilan sighed and said helplessly. Don't you want to attend the consort selection? Xiao Wanru looked sideways at Zhang Qilan. Zhang Qilan was also very good-looking, beautiful and a little cute. I don't want to. Zhang Qilan shook her head. She disliked coming to the palace the most. She was restrained everywhere and not free at all. Every time she followed her mother into the palace, she felt uncomfortable. What did your father say? Xiao Wanru hesitated and asked. Father means that I may not be selected. Zhang Qilan lowered her voice and moved closer to Xiao Wanru. Then she looked around and saw that the two misses were also talking in a low voice and didn't notice them. She lowered her voice and said, I heard that your big sister will definitely be selected. Which prince's mansion will she go to? I don't know. Xiao Wanru shook her head calmly. Your big sister is so outstanding, and it is said that she is the first beauty. If the first beauty doesn't enter the royal family, will she fall into an ordinary family? Zhang Qilan curled her lips and said. She had met Xiao Yanru several times. The first Miss Xiao looked very dignified and decent, but she always felt that she was too fake. It seemed that the first Miss Xiao was perfect without any flaws. In her brother's words, few women could compare with the first Miss Xiao's talent and appearance since ancient times. What's more, the first Miss Xiao's identity was extraordinary. She was the kind of woman that the young master of an aristocratic family was most willing to marry. Xiao Wanru's heart skipped a beat and she asked in a low voice, "It's said outside?" "Yes, don't you know? Everyone has been talking about it before, but they have been talking about it the most in the past 2 days. They also said that the reason why Madame of Duke Xing went to Yuhui Nunnery was to pray to the Buddha for the first Miss Xiao." Zhang Qilan nodded. Xiao Wanru's face showed a trace of strangeness. She remembered the topic that she had heard from the idle people outside in the carriage just now, and the noise of people crowding in front of Xiao Yanru's carriage. If it was said that Madame of Duke Xing was going to pray to the Buddha for the first Miss Xiao, it would be very accurate. What was the point of making a wish at this time? She couldn't go, but she asked her mother to go up the mountain with the excuse of being sick. That was to say, this wish couldn't be known by others. It couldn't be known by others, and it was particularly important. She had to enter the palace at the time of the consort selection, and there were rumors outside that Xiao Yanru would definitely be selected. An idea flashed in her mind. She suddenly felt that she might know why Xiao Yanru didn't enter any prince's mansion in the last life, but entered the palace. If she was a minister, she would inevitably be attacked by the emperor because of her great achievements. If she was a woman, she would easily deal with the members of the royal family. In addition, she had the power behind her and seemed to want to push her to the position of empress, which was enough to arouse the emperor's fear. Before the consort selection was announced, no one would know the final answer. Guessing the emperor's mind without authorization and acting as if she deserved it and was sure to win, not only would it make the emperor unhappy, but it would also affect the decision of the crown prince. Xiao Yanru raised the corner of her mouth slightly. She wanted to control this matter, but she didn't think that going too far was as bad as not going far enough. Of course, there might be other people adding fuel to the fire. But no matter what, it was certain that Xiao Yanru's trip to the palace would not be successful. Madame of Duke Xing in your mansion really went to fulfill the vow for your big sister. What vow did she fulfill? Why didn't she just say it was to fulfill the vow, but didn't say it clearly? Seeing Xiao Wanru in a daze, Zhang Qilan reached out to pull her sleeve and shook it. I really don't know. It's true that second aunt is not in good health. Xiao Wanru said with a bitter smile. She didn't expect things to develop in this direction. Is she really sick? Zhang Qilan said in disbelief. She is really sick. Xiao Wanru didn't hide it. Others didn't know about this kind of thing, but there were many people in the palace who knew about it. After all, honored consort Shu's accident at that time involved a lot of people. If people like Prime Minister Zhang inquired carefully, they would definitely be able to find out. All right. She really thought that she was born to be a phoenix. Zhang Qilan muttered and relaxed. She thought there was some important inside story, but it turned out that there was no inside story. It was just hearsay. Born to be a phoenix. Xiao Wanru quivered, and her watery eyes widened. She looked at Zhang Qilan in astonishment. She could be sure that this news was definitely not spread by Duke Xing's mansion. As soon as she finished speaking, her mouth was covered by Zhang Qilan. Speak softly. In fact, Xiao Wanru's voice was already very soft. Xiao Wanru shook her head at her, indicating that she would be softer. Zhang Qilan approached Xiao Wanru with sweat all over her head. I don't know if it's true. I also eavesdropped. Where did you eavesdrop? Xiao Wanru asked in confusion. In fact, it's also a very occasional opportunity. I went to Huaguang Temple with my father to listen to scriptures, and my father sent me out. I played outside for a while and felt bored, so I went back. I was afraid that my father would send me away again, so I sneaked back. When I passed by the back of a meditation room, I happened to hear someone talking about it. In fact, I just heard it, and I don't know if it's true or not. Talking to your father? Xiao Wanru asked. Not my father. My father is still in a meditation room in front, and the space between the meditation rooms is empty, Zhang Qilan said. I didn't dare to listen too much. Later, when I sneaked out, I met my father. My father also told me not to talk nonsense and said that I heard it wrong. You can't tell anyone now. Zhang Qilan said, and her voice became lower and lower. Although she was naive, she was not ignorant. This kind of inborn phoenix fate could not be said casually. It was a matter of life and death. Xiao Wanru frowned slightly. Although Zhang Qilan said that she had only heard it, Xiao Wanru believed that someone had really said so. Don't worry, I won't talk nonsense. The people inside didn't speak loudly, but I vaguely heard something like inborn phoenix fate and the miss of Duke Xing's mansion. After that, I didn't dare to listen too much. When Zhang Qilan talked about it, she still felt a lingering fear. When she came out from the back, she found that there were guards in front, but they were not from her mansion. I heard that the abbot of Huaguang Temple is proficient in Dharma and is very famous. Xiao Wanru said thoughtfully. That's what they said, but I don't know if it's true. Zhang Qilan said indifferently. She reached out to pull Xiao Wanru and said, Look, they are almost done. Let's go back to the flower hall. Xiao Wanru looked up at the few people in the team and nodded. When they returned to the flower hall, the nannies were already calling the roll. They were divided into two groups, one on the left and the other on the right. Chapter 734. The number of people on the left and right was about the same, but the people on the left were superior to the people on the right in terms of bearing, appearance, and overall feeling. Xiao Wanru and Zhang Qilan also stood on the left. Xiao Yanru had already stood there. Even Xiao Caihuan was there, but Xiao Kailing was on the right. Xiao Wanru only took a glance and knew that the people on the right should be those who had failed. It was not surprising that Xiao Kailing failed, but Xiao Caihuan was also selected. Fifth sister, where have you been? My two sisters have been looking for you for a long time just now. Xiao Yanru was a dignified and decent elder sister, so she naturally came over and asked softly. I met Miss Zhang and talked with her for a while. I made you worried. Xiao Wanru said. It's good that you're back. Let's wait first. Xiao Yanru smiled and said in a low voice. She glanced at Xiao Caihuan standing beside her and felt very uncomfortable. Sure enough, after all the beauties were divided into two sides, a nanny in charge came out and told the beauties on the right that they had failed and asked them to pack up their things and go back now. As soon as they entered the palace to put down their things, they were driven back. Some of them were confused, some of them cried, and some of them were very happy. They hurried back to pack up their things so that they could catch dinner at home. When all the beauties on the right left, the flower hall immediately became much emptier. Xiao Wanru's eyes calmly swept over the beauties who stayed. No matter what they thought in their hearts, at least they looked calm on the surface. Compared with the various postures of the beauties on the right when they left, these beauties were obviously better at hiding their emotions. Xiao Yanru lowered her head, looked down at her toes, and quietly listened to the nanny in charge of the palace talking about various rules in the palace. She also warned them that if they were not brought along, their range of activities was limited to Chushu Palace. If they were disobedient and offended the nobles in the palace, they would bear the consequences. This so-called taking responsibility for the consequences was not only her own problem, it might even implicate the family behind her. As soon as she said this, the beauties became even quieter, and some of their faces turned pale with fear. The uneasy atmosphere made the originally calm scene a little uneasy. After the nanny in charge threatened them, she said what would happen next. Next, the beauties would receive various etiquette training. Painters would come to draw portraits for them and then send them to the empress for the empress to choose. After the nanny in charge finished speaking, she no longer restrained the beauties. Today was the first day of entering the palace, and these beauties were very tired. All the courses would be held tomorrow. When the caretaker mama announced that they had dispersed, everyone relaxed and walked out in twos and threes. At least they had passed this step. Xiao Wanru, Zhang Qilan, and a group of beauties walked back together. They walked together for a while, and in order to talk, they fell behind the crowd. Qi Rongji looked at Qi Rongji with complicated eyes. Wanru of the crowd. Of the crowd. Wanru. She also came to participate in the election and was indeed selected. But she really had no idea what would happen next. During the 3 years in Duke Xing's mansion, she was no longer the arrogant Qi Rongji in Jiangzhou. Xiao Yanru was very outstanding, but now she had to admit that Xiao Wanru was also outstanding. She was so outstanding that she was jealous. Compared with Xiao Yanru, she was more jealous of Xiao Wanru. Both of them came from the same place. She was more outstanding than Xiao Wanru at that time. She looked down on Xiao Wanru very much at that time. She thought that Xiao Wanru was just an orphan picked up by General Qin on the battlefield with no parents. Unexpectedly, after entering the capital city, Xiao Wanru became the eldest lineal daughter of the former heir of Duke Xing. Even if she tried her best, she only got the title of Madam of Duke Xing's adopted daughter, and even delayed her marriage because of this title. Why could Xiao Wanru live so well? When she saw Xiao Wanru's gentle smile just now, she felt more and more hurt. But no matter how hurt her heart was, she now knew the gap between them, so she did not take the initiative to get close to her. Her elder brother said that several people from Duke Xing's mansion should also be there for the consort selection in the palace this time. He told her to be careful. That first miss was a scheming person, and Xiao Wanru was not easy to deal with. She would hide from them for now. One day in the future, when she stepped on others to get a position, she would see how they would kneel in front of her and beg for mercy. After making up her mind, Qi Rongji was more and more unwilling to be found by the misses of Duke Xing's mansion. Her elder brother told her to keep a low profile and said that he would arrange it. Her room was in the very back area. There were few people along the way. Most of the people left were in the front area closer to the palace gate of Chuxiu Palace. Compared with them, she was almost not good enough, but this was her only chance. Even if her status was low, she wanted to enter the prince's mansion. This was her only chance. She had been delayed for so long. Her status was not obvious, and her family background was not high. Now she was old, and it was even more difficult for her to choose a marriage. She sat silently in the room and gritted her teeth. Xiao Wanru didn't know that Qi Rongji had also come in, and she wanted to enter the prince's mansion like Xiao Yanru. She talked with Zhang Qilan and walked very slowly. When they reached the intersection where they separated, the two of them had fallen behind, and the people in front had disappeared. After separating from Zhang Qilan, Xiao Wanru turned around and was about to go to her residence, but she saw Xiao Xuanzi's smiling face at the intersection in front of her. She could only go forward. "Fifth Miss, our prince invites you over." Xiao Xuanzi smiled and came out from behind the bushes where he had been hiding. He bowed respectfully to Xiao Wanru and said, "Now." Xiao Wanru looked at the sky. Although it was not evening yet, it was the time when the sun was setting in the west. The winter days had originally fallen early. "Yes, just like this. It will be very soon," Xiao Xuanzi said with a smile and reached out to lead the way. Looking at him, she knew that she had to go. Xiao Wanru walked forward helplessly. They had just chosen a round. Those who should leave were still packing their luggage, and those who did not leave were also resting. At this time, no one knew where the palace maids had gone, and it was quiet at the palace gate. Xiao Wanru followed Xiao Xuanzi out of the gate of Chuxiu Palace and walked out. After walking for a while, she found that this route did not seem to lead to the back door of Prince Chen's mansion where Chu Luchen was. "Where are we going now?" "I'm waiting for you in front." "We're almost there." Xiao Xuanzi smiled and pointed forward. Xiao Wanru looked in the direction of his finger and saw a familiar pavilion, just behind the rockery in front of her. She clenched the handkerchief in her hand tightly and slowed down her steps. How could she not know the pavilion in front of her? In her last life, she lived here after entering the palace. This place was very close to Chushio Palace, and it was very convenient for the beauties to come over to draw portraits. At that time, there were 4 painters, 3 men and 1 woman, who painted portraits for the palace maids. She was one of them, but the other 3 lived in another place far away from her. Only she lived in the pavilion in front of her. There was a reason why she was separated from the other painters. On the one hand, it was because she was a woman, and there could only be 3 painters living there. On the other hand, it was because of Chi Baiyu's secret help that she could have such a quiet residence without having to squeeze with others. Prince, why are you here? This was originally used by our master to rest, and it is also close to the side door of Prince Chen's mansion. The Empress Dowager was afraid that our master would be tired from walking sometimes and had no place to rest, so she gave this place to our master to rest. Xiao Xuanzi said indifferently. Xiao Wanru's fingers holding the handkerchief trembled, and something seemed to flash through her mind. Your master has been using it. Yes, our master has been using it all the time. Everyone in the palace knows that the whole building was decorated by our master himself. Our master likes it here very much, and other nobles in the palace know that. But now there are so many people, our master may not come here often. Xiao Xuanzi said. He led Xiao Wanru along the winding path. It seemed to be right in front of them, but in fact, there was still a long way to go. Will your master abandon this pavilion? Xiao Wanru thought for a while and said, or will he give it to someone else to live in? How could it be possible? Our master likes this place the most. It is better than the palace where our master lived before. That palace is still empty. The Empress Dowager wants our master to live in the palace sometimes and doesn't have to go back, but our master doesn't want to. He would rather rest here for a night sometimes than go back to the palace where he lived when he was a child. Xiao Xuanzi shook his head repeatedly. The handkerchief in Xiao Wanru's palm was sweating. She could feel the slight dampness in the handkerchief. Her fingers moved slowly, as if she hadn't moved for many years. It is said that the Chushio Palace is looking for a painter to draw a portrait. This place is so close to the Chushio Palace. Will this place be requisitioned and ask the painter to draw the portrait of the beauties? Xiao Wanru heard her extremely calm voice. This voice sounded calm and indifferent to others, but for her, she felt that it was as if she didn't say it. No, everyone in the palace knows that this place belongs to our master. Even the Empress won't ask to requisition this place. Xiao Xuanzi smiled and felt that 5th Miss Xiao was really interesting today. She kept asking his master to give up this place, which was different from the past. Could it be that 5th Miss Xiao had other intentions? Thinking of this, Xiao Xuanzi asked tentatively, 5th Miss, do you want to live in this place? Xiao Xuanzi thought it was very possible. This place was much better than the Chushio Palace. Of course, if it was asked by others, Xiao Xuanzi would think it was too whimsical. His master would never give up this place. But if it was 5th Miss Xiao, Xiao Xuanzi thought it should not be a big problem. No, it's more suitable for me to live in it. Xiao Wanru shook her head. Of course, she wouldn't have such an idea. After thinking for a while, she still couldn't let go of the strange feeling in her heart and asked, does your master not like this place? Chapter 735. How could my master not like this place? Some of the decorations here were chosen by my master himself. If he really didn't like them, he wouldn't have given them to others. Xiao Xuanzi said indifferently. His master had occupied this place for a long time. There were many things here that his master liked, and some rare ones were chosen by him himself. The door was in front of her. There was no one guarding it, and it looked empty. Looking in, the room seemed to be small, but Xiao Wanru knew that there was a staircase on the right after entering the door. The upstairs was where she used to live. It was well lit and had a good scenery. In her last life, she would be in a daze upstairs when she had nothing to do. Compared with her previous experiences, the time when she was in a daze in the attic seemed to be the quietest scene in her memory. She went up the stairs and entered the room. As expected, she saw a wide rattan chair facing the sunlight at the window. On the windowsill, there was an exquisite vase with a few red plums in it. The light-colored curtains were hung high, and the gauze curtain was also half hung on one side. The hanging edge was in the shape of silver plum blossoms. In the center of the plum blossoms, there was a little stamen made of cat's eye stone, which was very beautiful and elegant. Xiao Wanru trembled all over, almost uncontrollably. This scene was exactly the same as what she saw in her memory. That day, when she was brought here, she saw the scene in front of her. She was so shocked at that time. Everything in front of her was so quiet and perfect that she almost couldn't help liking it. After she moved in, she didn't dare to move anything here, and she was unwilling to move. Everything was arranged as before, even the rattan chair by the window had been in the same position. How could she not be excited when she saw this place again in 2 lives? Everything seemed to be at the starting point, but she knew nothing about it. Her eyes turned red inexplicably. Did she forget something important? What's wrong? A gentle voice came into her ears. It was Chu Liuchen's voice. Is this your favorite place, Your Highness? She sniffed hard and had made up her mind. She turned her head and looked at Chu Liuchen with a smile. It's not bad here. Chu Liuchen's eyes fell on Xiao Wanru's eyes. Seeing the redness in her eyes and the tears in her eyes, his eyes darkened a little. She walked to the big rattan chair in front of the window and sat down. She looked up at Xiao Wanru, pointed to a smaller rattan chair beside her and said, "You can sit here." Only then did Xiao Wanru notice that there was a small rattan chair in front of the big rattan chair. She was too excited just now and didn't notice it for a while, so it was different. At least in the last life, there was no such a small rattan chair. Taking a deep breath, she walked over and sat down on the rattan chair. She raised her watery eyes and looked at Chu Liuchen. Seeing him squinting his eyes and sitting lazily on the big rattan chair, she felt an inexplicable bitterness in her heart. Xiao Xuanzi served tea and retreated to the door with a smile. After thinking for a while, he went downstairs to ask someone to prepare pastries. The 5th miss was still in the draft before, so she should be hungry. Were you wrong just now? Chu Liuchen asked casually. His question was out of the blue, but Xiao Wanru understood it at once. She shook her head, lowered her head with a slightly red face, and said, "There was a nanny just now, was she yours?" Her words were also very vague. She really couldn't say it out loud. How could she say whether the nanny who let her go in the first test was Chu Liuchen's? As long as she thought of how she should pass the so-called first test, her face would burn. How could she say this kind of thing out loud? Chu Liuchen obviously understood it. He looked at her with a smile and said, "Did she embarrass you?" "No." Xiao Wanru's face became redder. In that situation, it was the best. At least she still kept her underwear. "Next, there will be a painter to specially paint for you. Do you want to paint earlier or later?" Chu Liuchen looked at Xiao Wanru's blushing little face in a very good mood. It was rare to see this girl like this. "Don't interfere in this kind of thing." Xiao Wanru shook her head and refused. It was really not a good thing to attract attention first, whether it was the first or the last. If the beauty of the draft showed up before the final conclusion, it was easier to be framed, especially when there was Xiao Yenru, who was eyeing her covetously. She could be sure that Xiao Yenru would inevitably have an accident. She was not afraid of Xiao Yenru, but she was afraid that it would not be good if Chu Liuchen was involved in this kind of thing. "It's not a big deal. Even if I interfere, the Empress will not say anything. Imperial Grandmother will explain it to her clearly." Chu Liuchen said indifferently. He really didn't want to comment on Xiao Wanru. Since he had confirmed that she would marry into his mansion, he only needed to know whether she was good or bad. Originally, he wanted to ask Imperial Grandmother to marry her directly, but Imperial Grandmother said that it was better to go through the procedure first. It's not good. Xiao Wanru shook her head and refused. Her watery eyes glanced at a painting on another table. She stood up, walked to the table, and looked at the signature of Lay Buddhist of Weiyu Pavilion on the painting. She ran her trembling fingers across the paper and asked, "Where is Weiyu Pavilion?" "It's a courtyard in the south of the Yangtze River. I've been there and I think it's good." Chu Luqian didn't hide it and asked with a smile, "Why? Do you know it's me?" Xiao Wanru had asked him this question that day, but he just gave it a casual answer at that time. As for the name, he just said it casually and didn't take it seriously. After that, he asked someone to carve a seal and use this name. After that, he liked to use this signature when he painted. In fact, it didn't mean anything special. "I don't know, but this name is really nice." Xiao Wanru lowered her head and gently slid her fingers across the signature to hide the excitement and tears in her eyes. She pressed the corner of the table with the other hand. Because of the force, the knuckles on the back of her hand were protruding. She was really silly. It turned out that the person in her missing memory was Chu Luqian. It turned out that they didn't meet for the first time in this life, but in the last life. Some of her painting skills were taught by Chu Luqian, but she forgot him. She couldn't remember all kinds of things about him, everything about him, and how good he was. There were so many thoughts in her mind that she almost didn't know what to say. She couldn't tell what she felt. She was sad, she seemed to be happy, and she even felt excited. "I was thinking about whether I should change the name. Since I think it sounds nice, I'll use it. You seem to have asked me before, but it seems that my paintings haven't been sold out yet." Chu Luqian also came over. His handsome eyes fell on Xiao Wanru with a gentle smile. It seemed that he didn't notice all the excitement Xiao Wanru showed, but there was a deep look at the bottom of his eyes. He didn't have many paintings, and he named it casually. How did Xiao Wanru know it? She had asked him last time, but now she said so. It seemed that there was another secret, so he wouldn't press her. Chu Luqian was very satisfied with Xiao Wanru's straightforwardness. A gentle smile slowly appeared in his eyes. He reached out to touch Xiao Wanru's hair gently and said softly, "If you want to come over in the future, you can come by yourself. I've already told them to come here." His voice was very gentle, even with a little doting that Xiao Wanru could hear clearly. She looked up subconsciously and saw Chu Luqian's handsome eyes. His eyes were very beautiful. The slanting light of the setting sun fell on the corners of his eyes, as if there were thousands of tenderness. She blinked, and her long eyelashes fluttered twice. Her heart seemed to be hit heavily by something. It was soft, sour, and even astringent. There seemed to be a voice in her heart repeating his name over and over again. Her eyes turned red involuntarily, and she couldn't control her tears anymore. She reached out to grab his sleeve, bit her lip, and bit her lip again and again, trying to suppress the sadness, touching, or something else at the bottom of her lips. She couldn't tell clearly, but only felt that her tears fell uncontrollably. In her memory, Chu Luqian was fierce and violent. The palace was full of blood, and the gorgeous beauties were lying on the ground or on the steps one by one. The bloody steps paved his high road to imperial power, so she had been careful to guard against him. Even though the relationship between them had changed a lot unconsciously, she was still a little vigilant. After her rebirth, she was very careful with every step she took. She was afraid that if she took a wrong step, she would be consigned to eternal damnation like she was in her previous life. Even if she was sad and crying, she would forcefully suppress herself. Her heart was filled with coldness. She staggered alone on this road that led to an unknown place, lonely and fearful. With the shadow of the last life, even though she had always been strong in front of others and even tried to control everything in her hands, she still had a fragile heart. She was afraid that she would make the same mistake again. But now, she didn't want to think about anything. She just cried wantonly, even in front of Chu Luqian, whom she had been vigilant against. She had thought that after her rebirth, she had nothing to fear. A person who had died once should be the strongest. She had never thought that she would be so fragile and out of control, and she cried so uncontrollably. In fact, she should express her apology. In the last life, Chu Luchen appeared in her life, and he was very kind to her. He even taught her to learn painting and gave his resting place to her. At that time, she not only had a bad reputation, but was also a person with bad luck. It could even be said that if she hadn't entered the palace, she would have been drowned in the pond at that time. After all, when Shichi had died at that time, and she had no one to rely on, not even a home. She was even driven out of the Wen's mansion with such a bad reputation. If the Wen's mansion had continued to take action, it was very likely that she would have been drowned in the pond. With the help of Duke Xing's mansion, she was bound to end up. She had never thought that Qi Baiyu didn't have such great ability. Even if he had also stepped into the officialdom at that time, it was impossible. His noble was also a general. But even so, it was impossible for him to reach into the palace and let the palace allow her to enter the palace to paint for beauties. Chapter 736. If someone hadn't strongly recommended her, she wouldn't have been able to enter the imperial palace at that time. No matter what kind of person Chu Luchen was, he had always been kind to her. It could even be said that he saved her and treated her very well. However, she forgot him and all the good memories of him. There was only warmth in her memory. It could be seen that they got along very well at that time. However, she had forgotten all of them. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Xiao Wanru cried uncontrollably. Her whole body was trembling, but she tried hard to raise her eyes to see Chu Liuchen's face clearly. This person treated her very well in the last life. She was sorry for him. Chu Luchen was also startled by Xiao Wanru's sudden crying. He reached out his hand as if to touch her face, but he was worried that she would be scared. He frowned and looked at her with concern. Suddenly, he reached out to hold her in his arms and coaxed her gently, "Well, don't cry. Be good. Tell me what happened and I'll help you get revenge." Xiao Wanru's face was covered with tears. She snuggled against his chest with mixed feelings and listened to the steady and powerful heartbeat in his chest. For a moment, she felt more and more aggrieved. In fact, she shouldn't feel aggrieved. It was him who felt aggrieved, right? He was the one who should feel aggrieved. In the last life, he should have been very good to her, but she forgot him and didn't remember anything. She only remembered that everything here was helped by Qi Baiyu. Without him, how could she rely on the protection of this corner of the imperial palace and live a peaceful life for a period of time? It was all because of the person in front of her, but she forgot him. She felt that she should apologize, but she couldn't say 1,000 words in her heart. I didn't. She wanted to explain that it wasn't someone who bullied her, but she was the one who bullied him, but the words couldn't come out of her mouth. Complicated and sad emotions entangled her, filling her chest and making her feel like she didn't know what to say. Xiao Xuanzi ran up from downstairs in a panic. Seeing his master holding Xiao Wanru in his arms, he sneaked down. Although he didn't know what happened, his master looked very distressed and gentle, which was completely different from the master who couldn't smile from the bottom of his heart in the past. Xiao Xuanzi had seen clearly a long time ago that his master treated 5th Miss Xiao differently. "Alright, stop crying. If you continue to cry, it will seem as if this king has done something to you," Chu Luchen said softly. Seeing Xiao Wanru crying out of control in his arms, he felt both angry and happy. He reached out and hugged her tightly. This time, she did not resist and quietly nestled in his arms, which made him inexplicably satisfied. There was a part of his heart that was already in a mess. As long as she did not cry, in fact, he could do anything. "Don't cry, oh." He lowered his head and looked at the tearful face of the beautiful lady. His thin lips gently fell. Xiao Wanru watched in astonishment as Chu Luchen gently kissed her lips. It was very gentle and soft. Under her long eyelashes, she blinked her tearful eyes again and again. At this time, she should push him away. Even if there was an agreement between them, she should push him away. Otherwise, it would be going against the female teachings and rules she had learned for many years. However, she was unwilling to push him away. She didn't know what it was like in her previous life or this life, but she knew that she didn't want to push him away anymore. Since her rebirth, her heart had never been so uncontrollable. As if sensing Xiao Wanru's acceptance, Chu Luqian uncontrollably increased the strength of his hands. This time, his lips covered hers heavily, as if there were thousands of feelings that were about to burst out. After a long time, the two of them separated. Xiao Wanru leaned against Chu Luqian's arms. Although she was still sobbing in a low voice, she was actually not crying. Not only did she stop crying, but her face was as red as blood. She subconsciously hooked the corner of Chu Luqian's sleeve with her hands and blushed with shame. Chu Luqian lowered his head slightly and only saw a simple hairpin around the top of her black hair. There was a trace of joy on his thin lips. "Zhuozhuo, you like me?" His voice was a little hoarse, which was different from his usual clear voice. It inexplicably made Xiao Wanru blush more, but what made her blush more was Chu Luqian's joyful and slightly trembling words. When did Chu Luqian, who seemed to have everything in his hands, say words with a trembling voice? He tightened his hands on her waist, and Xiao Wanru felt that her slender waist was almost broken. She took a deep breath and gently pushed him, signaling him to let go. "Zhuozhuo, I like you." He loosened his grip a little, which allowed Xiao Wanru to take a few breaths of relief. After hearing the low and hoarse voice in her ear, Chu Luqian lowered his head and rested it on Xiao Wanru's shoulder. After saying this, he seemed to feel relieved all of a sudden. The corners of his thin lips were slightly raised. What was the deal? What was interesting? Happy or unhappy? At the moment when he relaxed, he immediately understood. He didn't know where the love came from, but the deep love was actually just a thin layer of window paper. But if he didn't pierce it, he would never know his feelings. "Zhuozhuo, I like you," he said affirmatively again without any hesitation. Since he had decided on her, he naturally had to let her know. This time, there was joy in his affirmation, which was more like a domineering declaration or an eager expression of his feelings. He raised his head and kissed her red earlobe gently this time. The soft touch made Xiao Wanru's heart palpitate, and she involuntarily clenched his sleeves. After thinking for a while, she nodded gently and drove away all the hesitation in her heart. This was an indescribable feeling, which she had never experienced before. Her heart beat so violently that she almost thought it was going to jump out of her throat, but she was also extremely happy. It was a feeling that she could not care less no matter what. Originally, she only wanted to be his shield, and she was willing to be his shield, and she was willing to leave when he needed her. But now, she was no longer willing to leave, nor was she willing to be his shield. Even if she was a shield, she only wanted it to be a permanent one. There were some things that she wouldn't understand if she didn't think about it. But when she thought about it deliberately, she found that he had done a lot for her, but she had always thought that he had ulterior motives. "Master! Master! Empress Dowager invites you to go over." Xiao Xuanzi went upstairs again, stood at the stairway with his head down, and reported from a distance. Xiao Wanru suddenly came to her senses and reached out to push Chu Luqian away in a panic. But when she saw Chu Luqian stagger a few steps, she hurriedly pulled his sleeves. Chu Luqian didn't expect Xiao Wanru to suddenly push him, so he took 2 steps back and stood firm. "Master!" Xiao Xuanzi was startled when he heard the voice. When he looked up, he happened to see Chu Luqian stagger a few steps back and said anxiously, "Go down first." Chu Luqian flicked his sleeves and said. Xiao Xuanzi didn't dare to say more and hurriedly went downstairs. In fact, he didn't want to come up. At a glance, he knew that 5th Miss Xiao was aggrieved and his master was comforting her. At this time, if he went up, he would be scolded. But he had to go up. The people sent by Empress Dowager were downstairs. Moreover, he was afraid that 5th Miss Xiao would suddenly cry like just now. If the people sent by Empress Dowager heard it, it would be another trouble. Don't cry anymore. Chu Luchen took Xiao Wanru's little hand, which was tightly grasping his sleeve, and said with a smile. Xiao Wanru didn't know what to say for a moment. She bit her lip and lowered her head. Well, don't cry. Look at your swollen eyes. If someone sees it later, they will say that you have been bullied by me. Chu Luchen said with a smile. He reached out to lift her chin and looked at her face. He, who was smiling with tears in his eyes, looked affectionate and gentle. I'm sorry. Will it be bad for you? Xiao Wanru blushed, reached out to slap his hand away, and lowered her head again. At this time, she was at a loss and didn't know what to do. Her heart, which had always been able to control the situation, was beating in a mess. She was at a loss, as if she couldn't remember anything. It doesn't matter. Don't let others think that someone bullied you. I'll go to Imperial Grandmother's place first. If you need anything in the future, you can come here to find people. These people who stay here are all my people. Chu Luchen said with a faint smile. His eyes slid across Xiao Wanru's red lips, and his eyes became more and more deep. Xiao Wanru's red lips were redder than ordinary people's. At this time, they were not only redder, but also slightly swollen. Then go quickly. Xiao Wanru said. She reached out and gently pushed him, and her mind slowly became clear. Since Empress Dowager came to find him at this time, and Xiao Xuanzi specially came up to tell him, there must be something. Okay, I'll ask someone to send you back. Chu Luchen said with the corners of his mouth raised high. He was in a very good mood. No, it's not good to be seen by others. Xiao Wanru shook her head and refused. What's wrong with it? Imperial Grandmother has long known that you are my people, and so does my uncle. Since they know it, who dares to say anything? My people are originally different from them. Chu Luchen said extremely arrogantly. His arrogant attitude, coupled with his elegant voice, was actually extremely weird, as if it was extremely incongruous. Xiao Wanru couldn't help but burst into laughter. Such a domineering tone really shouldn't be the style of Prince Chen, who looked as gentle as jade. Seeing that she finally laughed, Chu Luchen also raised the corners of his mouth and said in a very good mood, go back first. You can come here at any time, but if you want to see me, you have to inform me in advance. Hearing his words, Xiao Wanru blushed and said, I don't want to see you. But I want to see you. Chu Luchen said with a smile and suddenly reached out to hug Xiao Wanru again. This time, he moved very quickly. Before Xiao Wanru could react, he had put down his hands. Xiao Wanru's face flushed again. She bit her lip, suppressed the shyness in her heart, composed herself, and changed the topic. Your Highness, do you know the saying that people are destined to be born with the phoenix? Destined to be born with the phoenix? What is it? Chu Luchen tilted his head to look at her. Chapter 737. Xiao Wanru lowered her head more and hurriedly said, I heard it from Prime Minister Zhang's daughter. She said that she heard someone in Huaguang Temple say that she was destined to marry the emperor and mentioned Xiao Yanru. Chu Luchen had always known that she and Xiao Yanru did not get along well with each other, so there was no need to hide it from him and show her sisterly love with Xiao Yanru in front of him. Chu Luchen was not in a hurry to answer. He took her back to the previous rattan chair and sat down. Then he leisurely pulled the rattan chair he had sat down next to Xiao Wanru and leaned against it. Xiao Yanru was destined to marry the emperor. After sitting down, he asked. Xiao Wanru looked up and saw his lazy eyes. She nodded and said, it's true. Zhang Qilan said that she heard it and there were guards guarding her, but it was not her father. Destined to marry the emperor? That's a good idea. Chu Luchen thought for a while and suddenly smiled. Destined to marry the emperor, she would naturally marry the person who was destined to sit on the throne. Now the position of the crown prince had not been decided. His uncle's thoughts were hard to guess, but Chu Luchen could guess a little. The so-called destined to marry the emperor was really a good idea. Your Highness, you don't know? Xiao Wanru asked. She had guessed whether it was Chu Liuchen's people who released the news. It was a good thing to use the so-called destined to marry the emperor well, but it was not a good thing to use it badly. I haven't thought about how to deal with your mansion. Zhuozhuo, what do you think? Chu Luchen said with a smile in a very quiet voice. It was really hard to imagine that he was an extremely ambitious person just by listening to his voice. Let's wait. Xiao Wanru lowered her head and thought. The blush on her face slowly faded, and a trace of hostility flashed in her eyes. If it was really as she guessed that the death of her parents was related to the current second branch, she would never spare Duke Xing's mansion. Since you said so, let's do it this way. As for the destined to marry the emperor, you don't have to worry about it. Since someone has released such a rumor, it must be Duke Xing's mansion or Chu Luyue and Chu Liuzhou. But no matter who it is, don't interfere in this matter. Chu Luchen said. Hearing this, Xiao Wanru felt numb on her back, but she knew that this was the truth. The so-called inborn phoenix must involve a lot of things, and it was definitely not something that a weak girl like her could intervene in. Even if she was reborn, she could not intervene in such a major event related to the imperial court. Nodding his head, he said, I won't talk about this matter anymore. That's good. Do you want to rest here for a while or go back? Chu Luchen smiled and changed the topic. I'd better go back first. I've been out for a long time. If I don't go back, I'm afraid Yujie will look for me. Xiao Wanru stood up, looked out of the window and said. Outside the window, the sun was setting, and it was about to get dark. When Yujie saw the others coming back, she must be flustered before she went back. Don't worry, I've already sent someone to inform your maid. Chu Luchen also stood up with a smile, looked down at Xiao Wanru, and said, Why don't you stay here for dinner before leaving? I'd better go back. Xiao Yenru will be suspicious. Xiao Wanru's face inexplicably blushed again. There was a trace of affection in Chu Liuchen's words, which made her feel very ashamed to sit down again. Moreover, there were some things that she had to go back and think about thoroughly. Well, I'll ask someone to send you back. Chu Luchen said softly. No, it'll be inconvenient for others to see us. Xiao Wanru thought for a while and thought it was better to refuse. Chuxiu Palace is not far ahead, and you can see it from here. Although she didn't stand at the windowsill to look out at the scenery just now, she had stood there many times in her last life, so she was not surprised that she could see Chuxiu Palace at a glance from that position. Well, be careful when you go back. Chu Luchen thought for a while and found it was true, so he did as she said. He took her hand to the top of the stairs, squeezed her hand a little harder, and watched her go downstairs. Master, the Empress Dowager's people are urging you again. Xiao Xuanzi went upstairs again and saw Chu Luchen standing at the small window of the stairs looking out, so he gently reminded him. The palace servant sent by the Empress Dowager was taken inside to wait, so he didn't see 5th Miss Xiao go downstairs, but he had been paying attention to the outside. When he saw the guard make a gesture to him, he knew that 5th Miss Xiao had left, so he went upstairs again to report. Find out who else went to Huaguang Temple when Prime Minister Zhang went there, and who asked the abbot of Huaguang Temple to tell his fortune. Chu Luchen put his hands behind his back and said lightly. In fact, this kind of thing was not difficult to find out. The abbot of Huaguang Temple could tell people's fortune for a long time, and it was said that he could tell people's fortune very accurately, but he seldom told people's fortune. Yes, I'll find out about it later. Xiao Xuanzi answered, knowing that his master must have found something again. Chu Luchen walked down and said, send someone to protect 5th Miss in secret. Qing didn't follow Xiao Wanru into the palace, so it was naturally inconvenient for her 2 secret guards to enter the palace, but he could send someone else here. Master, this is in the palace. This time, Xiao Xuanzi didn't answer quickly, but reminded him carefully. Some people in the palace rarely took action, and they would only take action at the most critical time. I know it's in the palace. If I can't protect my own woman in the palace, what's the use of it? Chu Luchen said in a cold voice. The light at the top of the stairs dimmed, and his handsome face seemed to be hidden in the darkness, revealing a cold and bloodthirsty aura. Xiao Xuanzi shivered with fear and hurriedly said, "Yes, I'll do it right now." When Xiao Wanru came back, it was very noisy at the gate of Chuxiu Palace. Some misses who left the palace were coming out, and soft sedan chairs had been placed at the gate. Some of them were on good terms with them. Some were crying, some were laughing, and some were alone. Xiao Wanru stood at the gate and looked at a palace maid with a frown. The corner of her eyes suddenly twitched. She knew this palace maid. Not only did she know her, but she also remembered her very clearly. The last memory of this palace maid was that she followed Xiao Yenru. She was Xiao Yenru's personal palace maid, and she was also Xiao Yenru's confidant. In her last life, she would see this palace maid every time she saw Xiao Yenru. She was Xiao Yenru's most powerful accomplice. "Fifth sister, where have you been?" Xiao Yenru and Xiao Caihuan saw Xiao Kailing off at the gate. Suddenly, they turned their eyes and saw Xiao Wanru. They immediately lifted their skirts and walked over. "Fourth sister is leaving. I wanted to say goodbye to you just now, but I didn't expect that I couldn't find you." Xiao Yenru looked worried. Xiao Caihuan raised the corner of her mouth mockingly. She thought that Xiao Yenru deserved to be the most famous miss in their mansion. Look at what she said. She said all the good things, as if she had always been the most gentle and decent Mississippi. As for the others, of course, they were just her foils. On the one hand, she meant that Xiao Wanru didn't know etiquette and ran around as soon as she arrived in the imperial palace. If something happened, her family might be in trouble. On the other hand, she meant that Xiao Kailing was also shameless. She had been driven out, but she still found various reasons to keep Xiao Wanru here. "Big sister, I didn't say that I would wait for fifth sister or look for her. I just don't want to leave third sister, so I just want to talk here for a while." Third sister feels uneasy being alone in the imperial palace. Xiao Kailing usually didn't like to talk, but it didn't mean that she was convinced by Xiao Yenru. Hearing Xiao Yenru's words, she immediately became impolite and raised her eyebrows. "Fourth sister, I'm sorry. I thought you were waiting for fifth sister, so I deliberately said a few more words to third sister." Xiao Yenru explained softly with a smile, not getting angry because of Xiao Kailing's sudden change of attitude. Compared with Xiao Kailing, she looked much more dignified and decent, and at the same time, made Xiao Kailing increasingly unreasonable. "You." Xiao Kailing was so angry that she still wanted to say something, but Xiao Caihuan stopped her and gently pinched her, signaling her to stop talking. Xiao Kailing admired her elder sister wholeheartedly. "Fourth younger sister, you should go back first. Help me take care of mother. When I return in the future, I will definitely be filial to mother. Her health is not good, so one of us sisters should stay in the mansion to take care of her." Xiao Caihuan was much more eloquent than Xiao Kailing, and her words seemed to be very appropriate. As for Xiao Kailing being moved back, she only said that someone should stay to take care of third madam. Compared with Madam of Duke Xing, who was still in the Yuhui nunnery and was said to be in poor health, Xiao Yenru didn't ask about it. The sisters of the third branch seemed to be more filial. If there were many misses from aristocratic families selected in the first batch, they could indeed secretly inform the imperial palace. Anyway, it was impossible for all of them to be selected in the end, so why not eliminate them early? It sounded that Xiao Kailing left the imperial palace after the agreement, not because she was not outstanding. This reason was better and more harmless to Xiao Kailing. With so many outstanding sisters, fourth Miss Xiao took the initiative to withdraw. Her behavior was impeccable, and her purpose was to take care of her sick mother, which made people feel that she was filial. Xiao Yenru didn't expect that these sisters, who usually didn't talk much, would be so fierce. She was annoyed in her heart. If she had known this, she would have discussed it with her grandmother that day and let them be eliminated in the first batch, lest Xiao Caihuan pretended to be more filial than her in front of her at this time. fourth sister is filial," Xiao Yanru said with envy. "Big sister, third sister, fifth sister, I'll leave first." Seeing that Xiao Yanru no longer pestered the topic, Xiao Kailing restrained her temper. After all, the third branch had always been very afraid of the second branch. Xiao Kailing just said it out of anger. If it weren't for the fact that she was the only one eliminated among the four sisters and was in a bad mood, she wouldn't have dared to really contradict Xiao Yanru. At this time, she calmed down and naturally became much kinder. After bowing to them together, she took her maid to a soft sedan in front of the imperial palace gate. "Fifth sister, where did you go just now? Is there someone familiar in the imperial palace?" Seeing Xiao Kailing leave, Xiao Yanru turned around and looked at Xiao Wanru with a smile. They said the same words, but the meaning was closer than before. Even Xiao Caihuan stretched her ears to listen to them. Chapter 738. Where can I go? I just want to walk around. I feel a little bored. Xiao Wanru shook her head with a very light smile. After saying that, she ignored them and turned to walk inside. When she passed by the palace maid standing at the door, she turned her eyes and deliberately glanced at her. As expected, she was the loyal palace maid who had followed Xiao Yanru at that time. Seeing Xiao Wanru glance at her, the palace maid bowed respectfully. She had been standing behind them on the right just now and happened to hear their conversation clearly. There were many little palace maids like her in the palace. However, she was really unwilling to stay in the palace until she was sent out of the palace. This was Chuxiu Palace, where anything was possible. If she could choose a promising one, she would naturally have a bright future. Choosing one from so many beauties to serve as his master in the future, this also required a discerning eye. She stood at the door and wanted to choose a master who she felt had a bright future. Although all the beauties sent out were eliminated, the remaining misses were also related to the eliminated ones, so they would definitely be sent out. Standing at the door and watching for a long time, she felt that the most promising one was the miss in a light pink palace dress, because her appearance was really perfect. With such an outstanding appearance, she would definitely be selected. Therefore, she deliberately leaned towards Xiao Yanru and knew that she was the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion. With an outstanding appearance and a powerful background, even she had heard of the reputation of the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion in the palace. Of course, such a girl had a bright future. But at this time, she saw Xiao Wanru again. After hearing that she was the fifth Miss Xiao, the palace maid hesitated and didn't know who she wanted to be her master. Although she didn't know it now, it didn't prevent her from being very kind to the two misses. After bowing to Xiao Wanru, she bowed deeply to Xiao Yanru, who walked over behind her, very respectfully. Both of them seemed to be very likely to be the first Mississippi. As a small palace maid, she didn't dare to offend either of them. Xiao Yanru didn't care about the flattery of a little palace maid. She just glanced at her slightly and followed Xiao Wanru into the palace gate. She didn't believe that she just walked around casually. Xiao Wanru was not a reckless person. How could she go out for a walk on the first day when she didn't know anything? Fifth sister, fourth sister has gone back. There are only the three of us in the palace. We should take care of each other. Two Duke Xing's mansions can't be written with one stroke. We have to work together to get through this period of time. There was a hidden meaning in Xiao Yanru's words. No one knew what would happen next in the imperial palace. It was unknown who would stay and who would be sent out of the imperial palace in the end. In the face of the unknown, it was indeed reasonable for a small group of mutual interests to hold each other tightly. Xiao Yanru believed that no matter what Xiao Wanru was up to, she was alone in the imperial palace. It was the best for the sisters to hold each other and resist all external forces. Even if the two of them were clearly at odds with each other on the surface, they had to let everyone see that they were at peace. You're worrying too much, big sister. I'm tired, so I won't accompany you two anymore. Xiao Wanru said coldly. After that, she stood still and bowed to Xiao Yanru and Xiao Caihuan. Then she walked forward in a hurry, leaving the two of them behind her. Xiao Yanru was stunned. She didn't expect that Xiao Wanru would not give her face. Xiao Caihuan raised the corner of her mouth mockingly and said, "Big sister, I also have something to do. I just entered the Imperial Palace today. I'm really tired, so I won't accompany you anymore." After saying that, she quickened her steps and walked forward. Xiao Yanru was left behind alone. Seeing that the two people in front of her had left her behind, Xiao Yanru was so angry that her face turned pale and she almost couldn't control herself. She took a deep breath and calmed down. She looked around and found that some people had noticed the situation on their side and began to point at them quietly and talk. Xiao Yanru glanced at those misses gracefully and walked inside with a tranquil smile, as if they had not quarreled with each other just now, but Xiao Wanru and Xiao Caihuan really had something urgent to do. Xiao Caihuan caught up with Xiao Wanru in a few steps and said with a smile, "Fifth sister, let's go together." "Where's big sister?" Xiao Wanru said calmly. A girl like big sister has always been dignified and decent. How can she walk as fast as us? Xiao Caihuan raised the corner of her mouth and said meaningfully. Xiao Wanru understood. "Fifth sister, how is the scenery outside?" "I actually wanted to go out for a walk just now, but fourth sister was going to leave, so I didn't have time." Xiao Caihuan and Xiao Wanru walked side by side and asked curiously, "Isn't it beautiful?" Xiao Wanru thought for a moment and said, "In fact, it's nearby. I don't dare to go far. I only see a few rockery and a few pavilions on the side. I don't dare to go further." What she said sounded true. No one was stupid. They all knew that they couldn't go anywhere in the Imperial Palace. "Fifth sister, why do you have such a good relationship with Miss Zhang? When did you know Miss Zhang?" "Why didn't I know?" Xiao Caihuan changed the topic to Zhang Qilan. "When I was in the Yuhui nunnery, Miss Zhang also lived in the Yuhui nunnery for a period of time." Xiao Wanru didn't hide it. This kind of thing couldn't be hidden, and there was no need to hide it. "It turns out that you and Miss Zhang have such a fate. It's really an accident." Xiao Caihuan smiled kindly. She reached into her sleeve and took out a small protective talisman. She handed it to Xiao Wanru and said, "Fifth sister, this is the protective talisman I just got. It's for you." "Protective talisman? Just got it?" Xiao Wanru took it in surprise. It was a small protective talisman, and it was an exquisite protective talisman. The bag on the outside was more exquisite than she had seen before. She had seen the protective talismans of the Yuhui nunnery and the Huaguang temple, but she had never seen one in such an exquisite bag. This was no longer an ordinary protective talisman. The patterns drawn on it were exquisite, and it was more beautiful than the protective talismans she had seen before. "Yes, I just got it. I got one for you and one for myself." Xiao Caihuan looked around and said in a low voice. "Did you get it in the Imperial Palace?" Xiao Wanru's heart skipped a beat and she asked. "I got it in the Imperial Palace from a nanny in charge here." Xiao Caihuan said more and more carefully. How could a nanny in charge in the Imperial Palace have such a protective talisman? What does it mean by asking for it? Xiao Wanru suddenly had a strange feeling. Could the so-called protective talisman mean what she thought? "There is a Buddha hall in the Imperial Palace. Do you know that? I asked the nanny in charge to ask for it from that Buddha hall. Of course, I also paid a lot of money for it." Xiao Caihuan said with a little complacency, "Take it back and hang it around your neck and put it in your underwear. I heard that it works very well." That was to say, the nanny in charge took money from the beauties and then went to ask for this annoying protective talisman to deceive these beauties. Xiao Wanru turned the protective talisman in her hand speechlessly and asked, "Do other beauties know about it?" "There shouldn't be many people who know about it. I also learned about it by chance." Xiao Caihuan shook her head affirmatively and said, "Hide it carefully when you go back. Don't let anyone see it, especially our big sister. Maybe she will make trouble based on this." Xiao Yenru had an excellent reputation outside, but none of her sisters in the mansion really thought that she was good. Thank you, third sister. Xiao Wanru put the protective talisman into her sleeve and thanked her. She could be sure that there were many beauties who had bought this so-called protective talisman. In her last life, she had found that the nanny in charge of Chushio Palace accepted money from the beauties and secretly helped them do things. It even involved someone secretly killing other beauties. The so-called protective talisman naturally had another meaning, which was to collect money. But she didn't know if there was anything wrong with this protective talisman. The Buddha incense on it was faint. It had indeed been worshipped in front of the Buddha. But it was just worshipped. Xiao Wanru also smelled another smell under the Buddha incense, which was very faint and almost invisible. She was not even sure if she had smelled it. While talking, the two of them arrived at the place. Everyone was tired, so they didn't say much and went into their rooms. Yujie had been waiting inside for a long time. Hearing Xiao Wanru's voice, she came out of the room early. Seeing Xiao Wanru standing in front of her, she breathed a sigh of relief. She still lived in the room at the edge, but Xiao Keiling's room on the other side of her was empty. Smell it. Is there any smell on it? Xiao Wanru took out the protective talisman from her sleeve and handed it to Yujie. Yujie took it, frowned and thought for a while, and then nodded affirmatively. Miss, there is the smell of Buddhist incense in it, but there is also another kind of medicine that is too calming. If you smell it too much, your reaction will be so slow. Miss, where did you get it? Yujie took it and said, Miss, there is the smell of Buddhist incense in it. Third sister gave it to me. Xiao Wanru sat down in the chair and said lightly, does it just slow people's reaction? If it was only this, there was nothing to be afraid of. Moreover, it would last for a long time. From this point of view, even if people found that there was another medicine, they wouldn't feel anything, especially when it was mixed with the Buddha incense which had the same effect. It's not only slow people's reaction. If it is triggered by another medicine, it may even cause a bad disease. Yujie sniffed it again and said. What kind of bad disease? Xiao Wanru's heart skipped a beat, and her watery eyes were deep. She had guessed so before, but she was not as sure as Yujie. It should be a kind of bad disease on the skin. When it is serious, it will cause the skin to ulcerate greatly. I have been with Mingqiu Nun since I was a child. This thing happened to Mingqiu Nun a few years ago. Miss, do you still remember the story that Mingqiu Nun told you about causing a skin disease and ruining a miss's face? Yujie asked in reply. Yujie had experienced this story personally, while Xiao Wanru had heard it from Mingqiu Nun. Mingqiu Nun had even specially written it down. The reason why Mingqiu Nun paid so much attention to it was that she thought the powder was too mysterious and didn't seem to be from the Central Plains. Chapter 739. Xiao Wanru's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately remembered the past that Mingqiu Nun had told her. Because she had only heard about it, it was not as clear as Yujie's face, so she didn't remember it before. It was not from the Central Plains, so she felt that the smell was a little strange, but she didn't know what kind of medicinal powder it was. She had come into contact with a lot of medicinal materials in the past, but she had never smelled such powder. It could be seen that it was rare. Is it the evil disease caused by the incense? Reminded by Yujie, Xiao Wanru immediately remembered it and her face changed slightly. Yes, it's the one with the incense. Yujie said with a serious face. The room fell silent. Compared with other ways to cause the disease, the incense was more difficult to guard against. Xiao Wanru's eyes fell on a copper censer on the table by the window. There was incense in the censer, and the faint fragrance coming from the mouth of the censer was refreshing and refreshing. This kind of incense should also work. Xiao Wanru asked slowly. Yujie nodded with a pale face and asked, Miss, what should we do now? Put away the protective talisman and put it in. Xiao Wanru thought for a moment. Miss, can I bury the protective talisman? Yujie's eyes lit up. Since the protective talisman was not good, burying it was the best way. Xiao Wanru shook her head and said, "Don't bury it." She remembered what had happened to Madame of Duke Xing before. At that time, Nanny Sheng had buried the piece of oiled paper in the soil. In fact, it was easy for people to find something in the newly dug soil, especially in a place like Chuxiu Palace. There was no one in the past, but now there were so many people. If someone found the newly buried traces, they would definitely feel that something was wrong. At that time, it would be easy for them to find out that she was the culprit. Things in the imperial palace would cause great waves even if there was no wind, not to mention that there was wind. Xiao Wanru could be sure that at that time, it would not only be her protective talisman, but also endless disasters would be caused. But it was not appropriate to put it in her place. Don't bury it. It's not appropriate to put it here. If someone really tampered with the incense, Miss will be in trouble. Yu Jie said anxiously. Although Miss had just gotten the protective talisman and it would not be a big problem even if someone burned the incense, she did not dare to take the risk. She had seen with her own eyes that Miss, who had a malignant disease because of the incense, had no good part of her body. There were black bubbles all over her body. Later, even if Mingqiu Nun cured her, she was covered with scars. Her face was ruined. Go get a purse. Xiao Wanru ordered. Yu Jie nodded and got up to look for the pouch in the packages they brought. After a while, she came out with a pouch. Xiao Wanru put the protective talisman in it, thought for a while and asked, "Did you bring the mint?" "Yes, this servant will go and release it immediately." Yu Jie was stunned at first, and then she was overjoyed. She hurriedly turned around and went into the inner room to take out some peppermint. When the two of them entered the palace, they had also prepared some common medicines. The two of them had prepared the peppermint a long time ago. "Miss, if you hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have remembered it." Yu Jie covered the protective talisman with the peppermint, tightened the opening of the purse, and tied it up hard. After the medicine on the protective talisman was mixed with a special fragrance, it would cause pores to appear on the body of the person who smelled it, and the pores would break and fester. Neither of them knew how many of these symptoms would be caused, but no matter what, neither of them dared to try it. They could neither throw it away nor bury it. Suppressing it with peppermint was the best way. When Mingqiu Nun treated that young lady, peppermint was the main medicine she used. After that, Mingqiu Nun also said in a chat that peppermint could suppress this fragrance and make it fresh. Mingqiu Nun just mentioned it casually, and this was the reason why Yu Jie didn't think of it just now. At this moment, she was secretly glad that both of them had brought the peppermint in. Otherwise, where could they find this kind of peppermint? She hung the purse outside the back window. This was the last room inside, so she was not afraid that people would turn over there. There was only a small partition next to it, so it was impossible for anyone to find it. After closing the window here, the two of them calmed down. Xiao Wanru sat down again, and Yu Jie served tea. After putting down the tea, Yu Jie stood beside Xiao Wanru and asked in confusion, "Miss, this protective talisman was given to you by the third Mississippi. Could it be that the third Miss wants to hurt you? It shouldn't be her. Even if she hurts me, she can't get any benefits." Xiao Wanru shook her head and said. She was not sure that Xiao Caihuan would not hurt her, but she felt that Xiao Caihuan had nothing to do with her. Even if something happened to her, Xiao Caihuan would not get any benefits. Even if she wanted to block Xiao Caihuan, she could not block Xiao Caihuan's way. "But it was given to you by the third Miss," Yu Jie said in confusion. Xiao Wanru fell silent for a moment. She really didn't believe that Xiao Caihuan would hurt her now. She narrowed her watery eyes slightly and thought that the imperial palace was really a dangerous place. It was only the first day, but she had already dug a pit for herself. She didn't even know who had secretly hurt her. However, the Buddhist incense reminded her of a person. Even though this person seemed to have no malice towards her, she couldn't resist the malice of the people around her. The dinner consisted of 4 dishes and 1 soup, which was not bad. After dinner, a eunuch brought a few pots of hot water for her to take a bath. After washing up, it was completely dark outside. The master and the servant were also tired after a day, so they went to bed early. The light in Xiao Caihuan's room was also extinguished soon after. Obviously, she had fallen asleep. Xiao Yanru sat under the lamp, but didn't sleep. She held a letter in her hand with a slight smile on her lips. She had just received the letter and read it several times. After reading it, she picked up the letter, lit it on the lamp, and then watched it burn into ashes. "First miss, could it be fake?" Shuqi said hesitantly while cleaning up the ashes. "The letter was picked up by a little palace maid just now." "It's true," Xiao Yanru said with certainty and said with an increasingly complacent smile. She had always been worried about Xiao Wanru's appearance, but she was not worried at the moment. Unexpectedly, someone had planned for her before she made any arrangements, which saved her a lot of trouble. In this draft, Xiao Yanru regarded Xiao Wanru as her biggest opponent. But, this is the Imperial Palace. Shuqi was a little worried and reminded her carefully. "It's the Imperial Palace, so what? It's better to be here. Even Rui and Great Elder Princess can't intervene." Xiao Yanru snorted coldly. "But..." Shuqi still wanted to say something, but was interrupted by Xiao Yanru rudely. "Since it's not our idea, it will naturally not be caused by me in the future. No matter what happens to Xiao Wanru, it has nothing to do with me. Be careful not to give yourself away." Her cold eyes fell on Shuqi, which scared Shuqi so much that she hurriedly shrank her neck and did not dare to say anything more. Compared with the past, Xiao Yanru's temper was much more violent. At the beginning, Shuqi had suggested to Xiao Yanru, and Xiao Yanru had listened to her. Now Xiao Yanru basically acted arbitrarily and became more and more irritable in private. If Shuqi hadn't served Xiao Yanru all the time, she would almost think that Xiao Yanru had changed into another person. Shuqi felt that Xiao Yanru's temper was really very mild at the beginning. She would not get angry no matter what and could control her emotions very well. The first day after entering the Imperial Palace passed quietly. Early the next morning, the eunuch sent breakfast to the doors of the misses who stayed behind on time. After breakfast, they gathered again. This morning, they learned the rules of the Imperial Palace from the nanny in charge. This was a very painful thing for the misses who had not learned it or had not learned it properly. If they made a slight mistake, they would be scolded by the nanny in charge in front of everyone. However, those who had not learned the rules and etiquette of the Imperial Palace were often some misses who were not valued or powerful enough. Most of the misses had learned it, but they had not learned it to a standard. Xiao Ruru, Xiao Yanru, and the misses of several powerful ministers had learned it very simply. In the end, because they had nothing to do, they sat on the side and watched the nannies in charge scold those misses who had not learned it well and had to learn it again while chatting. Zhang Qilan ran to Xiao Wanru's side again. The two of them found a place and sat down to chat. "Fifth miss, do you have this?" Zhang Qilan asked softly. Seeing that no one was paying attention to them, she pulled out a piece of thread from her sleeve. The familiar thread happened to be the one she had seen yesterday. She nodded slightly and said, "Third sister gave me one. I thought you didn't have it, so I wanted to buy one for you. Since you have it, forget it." Zhang Qilan lowered her head and carefully stuffed the thread into her sleeve. She looked around for fear of being discovered. "Did you get it from the nanny in charge?" Xiao Wanru asked. "Yes, I specially inquired about it. It should be bought for my father's sake. However, your Duke Xing's mansion also has power, so those people should also give it to you for the sake of your mansion." Zhang Qilan squinted at the few nannies standing in the middle. Seeing that they did not notice them, she leaned over and whispered. "Where did they come from?" Xiao Wanru heard something and asked calmly. "There is a Buddha hall in the Imperial Palace. Do you know?" Zhang Qilan asked. Xiao Wanru nodded. Including yesterday, this was the second person to ask her this question. I heard that the Buddha Hall in the Imperial Palace is getting more and more effective now. I don't know who first went there to ask for a protective talisman. Later, it was said that it was quite effective. It's just that it's not easy to get a protective talisman in the Imperial Palace, so this protective talisman has become more and more precious. Zhang Qilan curled her lips and said, I actually don't believe it. There was no such protective talisman before. Xiao Wanru's heart skipped a beat, and there were some ripples in her watery eyes. I've never heard of it before, but this time I heard of it, and it's very prosperous. Zhang Qilan said indifferently. Chapter 740. Where did it come from? Xiao Wanru asked. I don't know where it came from. Anyway, it's very effective, especially for women, Zhang Qilan said and looked around. Zhang Qilan said as she looked around. Seeing that no one was paying attention to them, she whispered in her ear, it is said that those who live in the palace are all nobles. They all have good lives. If they can get the protective talisman from the palace, they can become nobles or be protected by the nobles in the palace. Xiao Wanru looked at Zhang Qilan in shock. Yes, that's what it said, but it's also a legend. I don't know if it's accurate. Zhang Qilan nodded. She was afraid that Xiao Wanru wouldn't believe it, so she said affirmatively again. Xiao Wanru was silent for a moment and suddenly understood. There was such a saying about the protective talisman. No wonder these beauties in the talent show would try so hard to get one. Then, where did these protective talismans come from? Xiao Wanru asked in another way. The Buddha Hall. Zhang Qilan said in confusion. She remembered that Xiao Wanru had asked about it just now. Who is in charge of the Buddha Hall? Xiao Wanru raised her eyebrows. Pushun Nun. Weren't you in the Yuhui nunnery before? Don't you know that Pushun Nun of the Yuhui nunnery entered the palace to preach for the Empress Dowager and temporarily lived in the Buddha Hall? There were a few nuns in the Buddha Hall before, but they were obviously not as powerful as Pushun Nun. Zhang Qilan really knew about this, and she thought that Xiao Wanru should also know about it. Wasn't she living in the Yuhui nunnery at that time? Pushun Nun. Xiao Wanru's heart skipped a beat, and a trace of darkness flashed in the corner of her eyes. She continued to ask, should Pushun Nun's 2 disciples also be in the palace? Of course. How can a person like Pushun Nun not have someone to serve her? In fact, even if she doesn't bring 2 disciples here, there are also nuns serving her in the Buddha Hall in the palace. Zhang Qilan looked at Xiao Wanru in confusion and asked, 5th Miss, do you know something? I'm just wondering why Pushun Nun, such a good person, would accept 2 mediocre disciples. Xiao Wanru changed the topic and quietly changed the topic. Are you serious? Her disciple isn't that good? Zhang Qilan asked with her eyes wide open. Do you still remember the nun who made things difficult for me when we first met? Isn't she one of the 2 disciples of Pushun Nun? Xiao Wanru reminded her with a smile. As soon as she said this, Zhang Qilan immediately remembered and was stunned. After a long time, she said, that's really nothing. He's actually the disciple of Pushun Nun. How did Pushun Nun accept such a disciple? Didn't she send him away early? Although she had also experienced that incident back then, she did not notice these things. The 2 of them talked softly, and they were very comfortable. Some of the young ladies who had learned the rules did not learn it well, and were scolded by the supervisor nanny. At this time, they started to sob, which was really pitiful, and slowed down the progress. The 2 of them were talking congenially. On the other side, Xiao Yenru was also talking intimately with a Mississippi. From time to time, she looked up at Zhang Qilan and Xiao Wanru. If Zhang Qilan or Xiao Wanru met her eyes, she would smile slightly, friendly and gentle. The last time in the morning was to draw lots, and it was time for painting. The morning passed quickly. When it was lunchtime, they went back for lunch. Xiao Wanru had just finished lunch when she heard a knock at the door. She asked Yujie to open the door and saw Xiao Yenru standing at the door with a smile. Big sister. Xiao Wanru stood up. Xiao Yenru nodded and walked in. Please sit down. Xiao Wanru pointed to the chair beside her and said. Xiao Yenru sat down with a smile. Yu Jie quickly cleaned up the table and served 2 cups of tea. Then she retreated behind her master like Shuqi. Fifth sister, I came here today because I have something to say, Xiao Yenru said gently. Xiao Wanru did not answer. She lowered her head, picked up the teacup, took 2 sips, and then slowly put it down. With a distant smile on her face, she looked at Xiao Yenru and waited for her to continue. She didn't think there was anything between them that needed to be discussed in private. Why did Xiao Yenru come here today? Fifth sister, do you know that Pushun Nun is in the imperial palace? Xiao Yenru said cheerfully with a face full of joy. Xiao Wanru nodded, narrowed her eyes, observed Xiao Yenru's expression, and waited for her to say something. When I went to the Yuhui nunnery to cultivate in seclusion, I wanted to learn painting from Pushun Nun. But later I had to go down the mountain for something, so I didn't have a chance to learn painting again. Now I'm in the imperial palace, and it happens that we have nothing to do in the afternoon. I wonder if you can accompany me there. If I go alone, I'm afraid that it will cause a misunderstanding. Xiao Wanru lowered her head. She knew what Xiao Yenru was worried about. If she kept wandering outside, others would mistakenly think that she deliberately wanted to seduce someone. In the imperial palace, there were only a few princes and it was not good to guess anyone's intention. Why don't you go to third sister? Xiao Wanru looked at her and asked without refusing or agreeing immediately. Third sister didn't like Pushun Nun very much at that time. If I let her go, she will definitely be in a bad mood and even deliberately find something to talk about. Xiao Yenru shook her head and said bluntly. Third sister has always been magnanimous. Why do you have a problem with Pushun Nun? Besides, Pushun Nun is your painting master. Why doesn't third sister like her? Xiao Wanru looked at Xiao Yenru and said. Xiao Yenru couldn't answer this question for a while. After being silent for a while, she shook her hand and said with a wry smile, this is third sister's private matter. Maybe we don't get along well. Some things are related to painting. Third sister went up the mountain to ask to marry Pushun Nun, but Pushun Nun didn't agree. In fact, this kind of thing is not a big deal. Her words were very vague, but because this matter was related to Xiao Caihuan, it was reasonable for her to say so. Fifth sister, this time we go to the imperial palace, grandma and father mean that one of our people should go to Prince Yu's mansion or Prince Zhou's mansion. But no matter who goes, and what the position is, it's not up to us to decide. I hope that during this period of time, the 3 of us can get rid of the past bad things and stand on the same side. We are all sisters, and it's easy to be connected if something happens in the imperial palace. Xiao Yenru said with a serious face. What she said was extremely reasonable. Even if they fought fiercely outside, they should work together in the imperial palace at this time. Otherwise, it was hard to say who would be implicated. Xiao Wanru fell silent for a moment and looked a little hesitant. Others didn't know the resentment between them, but they knew it clearly. What's more, Xiao Yenru's words implied the expectation of Duke Xing's mansion. This expectation was also known in the mansion. Xiao Yenru didn't lie about this, but the meaning in it was slightly different. Duke Xing's mansion did hope that a miss would be selected, but the candidate was Xiao Yenru. In a sentence, 70% was true and 30% was false, which was the most difficult to distinguish. Xiao Wanru thought for a moment and said, Big sister, I'm afraid I can't go with you. The lot I drew before is in the front. Whose lot did you draw? Xiao Yenru asked. At that time, everyone drew lots and left, and the 2 of them didn't go together. Until now, Xiao Yenru didn't know how Xiao Wanru's lot was. I drew 2, and it's coming soon. There's only 1 miss in front. That's a coincidence. I drew 3, and both of them drew 2. I'm not in a hurry. I heard that the painters don't paint fast, and it will take at least 2 or 3 days for a miss to paint. Let's go in a while, okay? Xiao Yanru said with a smile and didn't take it seriously. Although a miss can paint a lot, I heard that if there is any accident, the miss in the back will take the place. If she wants to find us, but we are not there, it will not be good. Xiao Wanru shook her head and refused. Seeing Xiao Wanfa refuse repeatedly, Xiao Yanru sighed helplessly. Since fifth sister said so, I'll go alone. I just hope that if someone asks, fifth sister, you can explain it for me. Xiao Yanru stood up and said. How should I explain it? Xiao Wanru also stood up. Well, just say that I'm going to find Pushun Nun. Xiao Yanru hesitated for a moment and said. Okay. Xiao Wanru nodded. No matter what happened between them outside the imperial palace, Xiao Yanru's request was reasonable. Moreover, Xiao Yanru had refused to go with her. It was not a big deal for her to explain for her. Even if it was to make up for her previous refusal, she should agree at this time. Thank you, fifth sister. Xiao Yanru bowed sideways to her, turned around and walked out, followed closely by Shuqi. When she reached the door, Xiao Yanru seemed to think of something, suddenly stopped, turned around, and said, Fifth sister, I had an appointment with Miss Wang in the afternoon. If Miss Wang comes later, please help me greet her. Miss Wang. Xiao Wanru didn't understand who she was referring to at the moment. It's the Miss Wang who talked to me in the morning. We had a good talk in the morning, just like you and Miss Zhang. We also made an appointment in the afternoon. Now I suddenly want to find Pushun Nun. I'm afraid that I will delay Miss Wang. Xiao Yanru said modestly. I got it. Xiao Wanru nodded and said. It was a piece of cake. Just like explaining Xiao Yanru's whereabouts before, it was not a big deal and anyone would agree to do it. Xiao Yanru bowed sideways to Xiao Wanru with a smile and then left with Shuqi. After they went out of the door, Yujie frowned and said, Miss, why do I feel that something is wrong? What on earth did first Miss come here for? She said a lot and entrusted a lot of things to Xiao Yanru. She looked very sincere, as if she had told everything about Duke Xing's mansion clearly. It could be said that she had confided in Duke Xing's mansion. However, when she thought about it again, she felt that Xiao Yanru was too cautious to make a special trip for such a trivial matter. Xiao Wanru smiled slightly and said with a faint look in her eyes. She made such a big fuss for only one purpose, for Miss Wang. Chapter 741. Miss Wang, formerly known as Wang Yusin, was the second daughter of the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Works. In fact, Xiao Wanru didn't know her. When Xiao Yanru was talking with this miss just now, she just glanced at her. Xiao Yanru happened to stand in front of Miss Wang Yusin, so Xiao Wanru didn't see Miss Wang's appearance clearly. Originally, she didn't expect that Miss Wang was Wang Yusin. However, Xiao Yanru's topic just now didn't seem to focus on this. In the end, she just mentioned this person as if she had just thought of this person. It was absolutely impossible for Xiao Wanru to accompany her to see Pushun Nun. Not to mention that Xiao Wanru didn't have any contact with Pushun Nun, and she had become enemies with Pushun Nun's two disciples. Given her relationship with Xiao Yanru, it was impossible for her to rashly accompany Xiao Yanru to see Pushun Nun in such a place. In the imperial palace, one wrong word or one wrong step could lead to eternal damnation. If it were other sisters who didn't get along well with each other, they wouldn't agree to go. Xiao Yanru's request was as good as not saying anything. As for explaining for Xiao Yanru, it was a trivial matter. Compared with the previous things, Xiao Wanru would definitely agree to such an insignificant thing. It seemed that this was the key to Xiao Yanru's visit this time, but in fact, the last one, which she almost forgot, was the key. Wang Yusin, Miss Wang, Concubine Wang, a hot-tempered and jealous concubine Wang. Concubine Wang was indeed Xiao Yanru's friend in the last life, and they had always been on good terms. When Xiao Yanru was Xiao Jiaoyi, concubine Wang had always been attached to her, making sarcastic remarks and helping Xiao Yanru torture her. Sometimes when Xiao Yenru pretended to be dignified and gentle, concubine Wang would be a vicious helper beside her. However, concubine Wang died in an inexplicable manner. For some unknown reason, she jumped into a lake in the middle of winter and drowned. At that time, Xiao Wanru saw this scene with her own eyes, so she remembered it very clearly. The lake that concubine Wang jumped into was not far from Chuxiu Palace. Standing at the back window of the attic that Chu Luqian had prepared for her, she could see it from a distance. Coincidentally, she was standing at the back window that day. She saw concubine Wang running over and jumping into the water. It was winter, so the palace maids and eunuchs who chased after her didn't dare to go down the mountain. Only a few loyal ones jumped into the water. By the time the emperor got the news and came over, concubine Wang was already dead. Xiao Wanru remembered that she was very happy to see it at that time. It seemed that she had been secretly pricked by concubine Wang with a needle the day before, and her wrist was so swollen that she could not even hold a paintbrush. Is there something wrong with Miss Wang? Yu Jia said worriedly, since there's a problem, why did Miss agree to first Miss's request? She could have just declined it. Don't refuse. I'd like to see what Miss Wang and Xiao Yenru want to do this time. Xiao Wanru said with a low smile and a cold look in her eyes. She was not the lonely and helpless painter in her last life, and the two of them were not the emperors as yet. In terms of status, her current status was still higher than Miss Wang Yusin's, so she was not afraid to meet Miss Wang again. When Miss Wang Yusin came, Xiao Wanru was talking in Xiao Caihuan's room. Hearing Xiao Yenru's knock on the door, Xiao Caihuan asked her maid to go over and have a look, and then brought Wang Yusin over. Wang Yusin, who was dressed in a light yellow palace dress, was also very beautiful. In terms of appearance, she even looked very kind and sweet. She didn't look as mean and vicious as Xiao Yenru's hatchet man in her last life. Third Miss Xiao, fifth Miss Xiao. After bowing to the two sisters, she stood up with a smile and introduced her name and origin. Miss Wang, please sit down. Xiao Caihuan, who was the host here, politely invited her to take a seat with a smile. Xiao Wanru smiled slightly and didn't answer. She just looked Miss Wang up and down, as if it was the first time she had seen her. In fact, it was the first time she had seen her. It was 3 years later when she saw her in her last life. When Wang Yusin, who had become an, met her, she was more arrogant and domineering. But at present, Miss Wang couldn't be arrogant. The three of them talked and laughed harmoniously, although Wang Yusin and Xiao Caihuan were talking most of the time. Xiao Wanru looked at them with a smile, and from time to time, she couldn't help responding and occasionally drinking tea. Fifth Miss Xiao, do you want to stay or leave? Suddenly, Wang Yusin brought the topic to Xiao Wanru with a smile and looked at Xiao Wanru kindly. It's not up to us to decide. Xiao Wanru smiled slightly and said leisurely. She sat in the back seat and didn't seem to like talking much, which would make people feel inattentive. However, such a beautiful appearance was a taboo no matter where she was. Thinking of what Xiao Yenru had said to her before, the corner of Wang Yusin's eyes twitched fiercely. Xiao Yenru was the most taboo for her. Before entering the imperial palace, she knew that Xiao Yenru was the first beauty, and such a reputation must be her strongest opponent. Unexpectedly, she not only saw Xiao Yenru, but also saw Xiao Wanru, who was more outstanding. Compared with Xiao Yenru, who seemed to be gentle and magnanimous, Xiao Wanru in front of her was her ultimate opponent. I heard that you know Prince Yu, fifth miss. Wang Yusin pretended to be indifferent and said. Even Xiao Caihuan looked at Xiao Wanru. She really didn't know about it. Prince Yu. Xiao Wanru frowned and shook her head. I've only seen him once from a distance. You've only met him once? I heard that Prince Xian and Prince Yu met you together, and Prince Xian even came to Duke Xing's mansion to see you. Wang Yusin said with a surprised look. Xiao Caihuan looked at Xiao Wanru with a little suspicion. She seemed to have heard this from someone in the mansion, but she didn't know whether it was true or not. Now it seemed that it was true. Xiao Wanru's face darkened. She raised her watery eyes, and her cold eyes fell on Wang Yusen. Miss Wang, what do you mean? Do you know that the last thing we can't do in the imperial palace is talk? If you want to know whether what I said is true or not, then let's go to see the Empress now and ask her to invite Prince Xian and Prince Yu here and ask them face to face. It's better than this kind of suspicion that will ruin our reputation in private. Xiao Wanru said and stood up, as if she was going to confront them face to face. Wang Yusen was stunned at first, and then her face turned red, and her hands and feet couldn't help trembling. She didn't expect that a simple test would make Xiao Wanru say such a thing. But if it really went to the Empress, she would definitely be in trouble. For a moment, she was angry and resentful, and regretted that she had spoken too quickly. When Xiao Yanru told her, she repeatedly said that she couldn't talk about this kind of thing, but when she saw Xiao Yanru sitting on the side looking very kind, she couldn't help asking. Fifth Miss, it's just some rumors I heard. You can't take them seriously. Why bother the Empress? Although Wang Yusen was angry, she had to admit her mistake. She had just arrived at the palace for the consort selection, and she had already gotten into a quarrel. Furthermore, she had indeed overheard it. If the Empress found out, she would immediately be sent back. She was not young anymore. She had stayed until now and had not gotten married just for this consort selection. She could not return. It's good that you think so, Miss Wang. I don't mind, but I'm afraid that Prince Xian and Prince Yu will investigate it. Although this is Chuxiu Palace, which is a little remote, it is still in the palace. If the two princes investigate it, I'm afraid that even your father will have to bear the consequences, not to mention Miss Wang. Xiao Wanru said lightly, turned to Xiao Caihuan and said, Third sister, I'm a little uncomfortable, so I can't accompany you anymore. Since you're not feeling well, go back. Xiao Caihuan nodded. Watching Xiao Wanru leave, Wang Yusen was ashamed and annoyed, and almost crushed the handkerchief in her hand. She didn't expect that Xiao Wanru, who seemed to be easy to bully, was so difficult to deal with. She was confused by Xiao Wanru before and accidentally said what was in her mind. Third Miss, I'm leaving too. I've been out for so long, and it's time to go back. Wang Yusen stood up with a dry smile. Xiao Caihuan also stood up and said, Then I'll see you off, Miss Wang. You're welcome, Third Mississippi. I won't bother you anymore. Wang Yusen was really not in the mood, so she pulled her handkerchief and refused. She was full of anger now, so she was not in the mood to deal with Xiao Caihuan. After saying this, she turned around and walked out without waiting for Xiao Caihuan to say anything. When she got out of the room and saw Xiao Wanru's back, she glared at her for a few times and then left with anger in her heart. Originally, she came to see Xiao Wanru first. After all, Xiao Wanru's appearance gave her a great sense of crisis. Now it seemed that it was true. Xiao Wanru really had a special relationship with Prince Yu. Otherwise, she wouldn't have dared to ask the Empress to invite Prince Yu to confront her face to face. Was she sure that Prince Yu would prove her words? Prince Yu and Xiao Wanru had known each other for a long time. This time, it was very likely that Xiao Wanru would be chosen as the princess, so she couldn't calm down. She and Prince Yu had also known each other for a long time, and Prince Yu had always had a good impression of her. In her words with her father before, she also meant to wait for the consort selection. But with her identity, she could only be a concubine at most. But if the princess was Xiao Wanru, she was really unwilling. She went out, turned in a direction, and went straight out of the palace gate. At this time, Prince Yu might be there. Before she entered the palace last time, Prince Yu had hinted to her. Miss, where is your incense? The servant girl walking behind her reminded her. After Wang Yusen stood still, she took out a small piece of incense from her sleeve and was about to throw it away. Miss, don't throw it away. It's not good if it's seen here. The servant girl pointed to the gate of Chuxiu Palace, and a palace maid at the gate was looking at them in surprise. Let's go. We'll talk about it later. Wang Yusen put the incense back into her sleeve and said coldly. This incense was supposed to be put in the incense burner in Xiao Wanru's room, but she didn't expect that Xiao Wanru was not in her room but in Xiao Caihuan's room. Chapter 742. Remember in 1 second, 800 mail sign /say net wonderful pop-up window free reading. Miss, where are we going now? Go find His Highness Prince Yu. Wang Yusin said angrily. She must mess up Xiao Wanru's plan. After that, she strode out. When the palace maid at the gate saw her coming, she hurriedly bowed to her. She pushed her hard and staggered to the ground. Wang Yusin was in a bad mood, so she ignored a little palace maid and walked out with her maid. She didn't notice the palace maid who had fallen to the ground behind her and was staring at her back with hatred. As a palace maid, and an outstanding one at that, although she had been living at the bottom of the palace, Han Dan had always wanted to get out of here. Apart from her birth, she didn't think she was any worse than the beauties here, especially the young lady just now. Her father was a Shiozai, but he remained a Shiozai his entire life. In the end, he was so poor that he couldn't even support himself. She was the daughter of a scholar and was very beautiful. After her father's death, she entered the palace. Having seen the glory and splendor of the royal family, even though she was just a palace maid, she had infinite ideas. She wanted to find a good master. With her good appearance and intelligence, it would be better if she had a chance to climb up. Now she had taken a fancy to the first miss and the fifth miss of Duke Xing's mansion. She felt that both of them had great prospects. As for the young lady who had rushed out with a ferocious expression, she was inferior to him. He didn't know where she got the courage to get angry in the palace. Han Dan was very annoyed, but there was nothing she could do. Originally, if there was only one choice, she would have directly pledged her loyalty and wholeheartedly assist this young lady. But now that there were two choices, she would have to wait and see. After all, she had heard that in the aristocratic families, once a young lady was chosen, the other young ladies would not be chosen. If she chose the one who was selected, there would be no hope. The first miss and the fifth miss both came from the same mansion. Between the two of them, only one could stay, even though they were the most outstanding among all the beauties. Of course, before the final candidate was decided, she would try her best to please both of them. Thinking about this, Han Dan stood up, patted the dust on her clothes, looked at Wang Yusin's back, and cursed in a low voice, "Ugly people make more trouble." Then, he limped into the palace. Wang Yusin didn't know that she was now being scolded by a palace maid she despised. Of course, she didn't know that this palace maid would be her opponent in the future. Now she was full of anger provoked by Xiao Wanru and couldn't suppress it. She just wanted to complain to Chu Luiyue. After a few turns, he came to the front of a pavilion. He looked around and saw two guards standing in front of the door. He was overjoyed. His Highness Prince Yu should be there. The reason why she knew this place was that Chu Luiyue met her when he went to Chu's mansion. He inadvertently mentioned this place and said that he would enjoy the scenery here when he was free. He also told her that she could also come here to enjoy the scenery if she had nothing to do after entering the palace. In order to be afraid that she did not know the way, he specially drew a simple map from Chuxiu Palace to here. She calmed herself down and stood up to tidy her hair. She asked her maid, "Is my hair messy?" "It's not messy. Miss, you are still very beautiful." The maid looked at it and praised. These words pleased Wang Yusin. She turned around and walked to the front of the pavilion. When the two guards saw her coming, they stretched out their hands to stop her and asked coldly, "Who are you?" "I am the daughter of Vice Minister Wang. I am attending the consort selection in the palace. I want to meet His Highness Prince Yu," Wang Yusin said softly. The two guards glanced at each other, and one of them said, "Wait a minute." After that, he turned around and walked inside. The others still stood in front of Wang Yusin, not allowing her to take half a step forward at will. The guard who went in to report moved quickly. After a while, he came out and bowed respectfully to Wang Yusin. "Miss Wang, Our prince invites you to come in. Thank you. Wang Yusen said proudly. Sure enough, His Highness Prince Yu would be waiting for her here. She became more and more confident. She had always thought that she was good-looking, but when she entered the palace, she found that there were too many beauties in the consort selection. Although she was outstanding, she was not the most outstanding one. Compared with the sisters of Duke Xing's mansion, she was really not good enough. Fortunately, the first Miss Xiao said that she had no intention of being selected. The one selected from Duke Xing's mansion should be Xiao Wanru. Therefore, she had a very good attitude towards Xiao Yenru. After a while, the two of them became good sisters who talked about everything. But now, even if she was not as good-looking as Xiao Wanru, so what? Prince Yu took a fancy to her, not Xiao Wanru. In order to wait for her to come, he had been waiting here early. Xiao Wanru could not compare with such a friendship. With Prince Yu's confidence, Xiao Wanru could only dream of entering Prince Yu's mansion. Chu Luiyue stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the lake outside the window. The window was facing the east, and the sunlight shone in. He looked as if he was gilded, becoming taller and more handsome. The layout of the room was very simple, with only a desk and a few chairs. It was a leisure office. This was indeed the place where Chu Luiyue occasionally rested and worked. In fact, there was no such place originally, but because of the consort selection, the Empress gave Prince Yu, Prince Zhou, and Prince Xian a pavilion near Chuxiu Palace so that they could occasionally see these beauties. Under the premise of the general environment, the princes also had a certain degree of freedom to choose their own women. Of course, the position of princess was still unquestionable, but if there were really people they liked, they could also choose one or two to marry into the mansion. Of course, this had to be under the condition that it did not conflict with the position of princess. Chu Luqian originally had his own pavilion here, so the empress did not decorate it. However, Chu Luiyue felt that this place was very good. When Wang Yusen came in and saw Chu Luiyue's tall back, she immediately lowered her body shyly and bowed sideways. Greetings, Prince Yu. Miss Wang, please sit down. Chu Luiyue turned around. Although the smile on his face was very faint, it could be seen that it was much softer than the coldness in front of others in the past. Thank you, Your Highness. Wang Yusen came over and sat down on a chair on one side. She lowered her head with a red face and rubbed the handkerchief in her hand uneasily, feeling excited. As expected, Prince Yu was waiting for her here, and Prince Yu spoke to her very softly. These two feelings made her very excited. Miss Wang, what's the matter? Chu Luiyue walked to the main seat, lifted his robe, sat down, and asked in a warm voice. Wang Yusen couldn't speak for a while, only feeling that her face was burning. All the words she had said before disappeared when she saw Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue frowned secretly and glanced at Wang Yusen, who seemed to want to say something. He still had something to do later, so he didn't want to waste more time on Wang Yusen. He coughed in a low voice and started the topic. Miss Wang, how are you living in the palace? If you feel uncomfortable, tell me, and I will do my best for you. In fact, these words were ambiguous. Chu Luiyue took a fancy to Assistant Minister Wang's strength. Assistant Minister Wang's rank was not very high, but the Wang family was an aristocratic family, and Assistant Minister Wang was not the only official in the family. On the surface, it seemed that Assistant Minister Wang's rank was not high, which ruled out the possibility of Wang Yusen being selected as a princess. With Wang Yusen's background, she could become his concubine or concubine, which was Chu Luiyue's original plan. My place is not bad, but... Wang Yusen said softly. But what? Chu Luiyue was impatient in his heart, but he didn't show it on his face. He still asked in a very gentle voice. Compared with his previous sharpness, he was almost gentle. Wang Yusen felt her heart beat faster, as if something was about to jump out of her heart. She subconsciously clenched the handkerchief in her hand and said coquettishly, most of the ladies are very kind and don't bully others. We live happily together. Did someone bully you? Chu Luiyue frowned and asked. He really didn't want to deal with this kind of thing between women. Wang Yusin, who was secretly looking at him, saw his expression. She thought that Chu Luiyue was angry because she had been bullied, so she was overjoyed. No, no one bullied me. She raised her hand and shook her hands, denying it. But her eyes and expression showed that she had been bullied, and she didn't dare to say anything. Tell me, who bullied you? Chu Luiyue was not in the mood to deal with her, so he asked directly. If it was an irrelevant person, he didn't mind teaching her a lesson secretly. It's 5th Miss Xiao. Wang Yusin wiped her tears aggrievedly and wiped the non-existent tears with a handkerchief. She is the granddaughter of Rui, and great elder princess and the lineal miss of Duke Xing's mansion. She, 5th Miss Xiao. Xiao Wanru. A slender and delicate figure immediately jumped out of Chu Luiyue's mind. This time, he really frowned, even with some inexplicable annoyance. Tell me, what's going on? How did she bully you? Wang Yusin had originally come to complain. Now that she had provoked Prince Yu's anger, she became more and more aggrieved. Thinking of Xiao Wanru's rebuke of her just now, she actually squeezed out a few drops of tears. Her eyes also turned red. 5th Miss Xiao rebuked me in front of the misses of Duke Xing's mansion by virtue of her identity. She said that I couldn't be selected. Wang Yusin cried. She said that even if I could be selected, in the end, she wouldn't let me have an easy time. Of course, she meant to hint to Chu Luiyue that if she entered Prince Yu's mansion, Xiao Wanru must not. Otherwise, with Xiao Wanru's character, she would definitely deal with her. If a vicious woman wanted to deal with her beloved woman, no man would let this woman have a chance to enter his mansion. Because of Chu Luiyue's gentleness, Wang Yusin had an illusion that she was the woman whom Prince Yu cared about. At this time, she consciously put herself in the shoes of Prince Yu and felt that this matter was very certain. Xiao Wanru would not be able to enter Prince Yu's mansion if she was there. Chapter 743. Why did she say that about you? Chu Luiyue asked. I don't know. I was talking to several Mrs. Xiao. I was talking about your highness. I said that when I saw your highness in the past, your highness was handsome, spirited, and extremely gentle, but people said that your highness was cold. In fact, I didn't say anything else, but 5th Miss Xiao flew into a rage and repeatedly reprimanded me, saying that I shouldn't have mentioned Prince Yu. Wang Yusin looked more and more aggrieved. Of course, she meant that Xiao Wanru also wanted to marry into Prince Yu's mansion, so she showed great malice to her and acted like the future mistress of Prince Yu's mansion. Xiao Wanru was still in the consort selection, and it was hard to say whether she could be selected or not. What's more, if she could marry into Prince Yu's mansion, she could say it as a sure thing. Moreover, she directly slapped Prince Yu in the face and trampled his beloved woman under her feet, as if she would not give up until she died. No man could bear it. Although Wang Yusin looked aggrieved, she was secretly complacent. No matter how outstanding Xiao Wanru was, she spoke ill of her in front of Prince Yu first, and he would definitely hate her. So what if he saw her outstanding appearance at that time? If he hated her, he hated her. Chu Luiyue's eyebrows twitched. He picked up a cup of tea on the desk with his slender fingers and took a sip. His eyes fell slightly, concealing a trace of emotion in them. Xiao Wanru liked him and wanted to marry into his Prince Yu's mansion. With Xiao Wanru's identity, it was possible, but if she married into his Prince Yu's mansion, Xiao Yanru would not be able to marry again. Then the support of Duke Xing's mansion might be taken away by Chu Liuzhou. Of course, he didn't want such a thing to happen. In fact, the rule that two sisters could not marry into the royal family at the same time was not absolute, but it was certain that two sisters could not marry into the same prince's mansion. Moreover, most of the sisters were daughters of lineal descent, so they had their own noble identities. In comparison, Chu Luiyue still thought that Xiao Yanru had a greater chance of winning, but when he thought of Xiao Wanru, he felt that since she loved him so much, he couldn't let her go. In his heart, he was secretly thinking of a way to let these two sisters enter his prince's mansion together. That would be the best. The room became quiet, and Wang Yusin twisted her body uneasily. She had thought that Chu Luiyue would promise her that he would never let Xiao Wanru enter Prince Yu's mansion, but what did he mean now? Your Highness. Wang Yusin asked tentatively. I see. You can go back now. Pay more attention to 5th Miss Xiao's mood in the future. If anything happens, report to me immediately. I'll make sure you're satisfied. Chu Luiyue raised his head and said in a warm voice. Thank you, Your Highness. Wang Yusin stood up excitedly and bowed deeply to Chu Luiyue. She felt relieved. In her opinion, Chu Luiyue had already made his feelings clear to her. Since he had achieved his goal, she knew that she shouldn't stay here any longer. Seeing Wang Yusin leave, Chu Luiyue frowned heavily and looked at Wang Yusin's back coldly. When he saw Xiao Wanru in the palace that day, he was more shocked than Xiao Yanru. If he had known that Xiao Wanru would make him so different, he should have taken action when he was in Jiangzhou that day instead of waiting until now. At present, he would not let go of Xiao Yanru. Fortunately, Xiao Wanru was still young, so he could let her go back and wait for a few more years. When his affairs were settled, it would not be difficult for him to let Xiao Wanru enter the palace. Even if it was against the rules, if he was in power, it would not be difficult for him to ascend to the position of Emperor Tianming. Wang Yusin walked halfway and turned around, only to see Chu Luiyue looking at her back in a daze, and reluctant to part with her. She blushed with shyness, but in her heart, she became more and more happy. Sure enough, Prince Yu was very fond of her. Chu Luiyue didn't expect that his days could make Wang Yusin imagine so many things. He took a deep breath. This time, he had to stop Xiao Wanru from being selected, especially Chu Luchen. He heard that 3 years ago, Imperial Grandmother seemed to intend to marry Xiao Wanru to Chu Luchen. That invalid had been hanging in the air, but as long as he didn't die, he would be an invalid who was not easy to deal with. He must not underestimate him. In fact, he could start from Rui and Great Elder Princess. As long as Rui and Great Elder Princess understood that if she got in touch with Chu Luchen, she could only be a widow in the end. He believed that Great Elder Princess, who had just found her granddaughter, would not be happy. At that time, even the Empress would have to give Great Elder Princess face and would not force her. As for the Empress Dowager, Rui and Great Elder Princess had her own way to explain it to her. As long as he showed a little of his strength, Great Elder Princess would know how to choose. Thinking of this, he immediately felt relaxed. This matter had been bothering him, but he didn't expect that Wang Yusin would solve the problem for him. Wang Yusin was not useless. It was also a good thing to keep her in the palace to keep an eye on Xiao Wanru. It was a pleasant surprise. Miss, are we going to make a protective talisman? Yujia looked at Xiao Wanru in surprise and asked. Xiao Wanru looked at the small red bag in her hand and said, yes, we'll make one ourselves. The protective talisman should always be hung around one's neck. If third sister knows that I didn't wear the one she gave me, she might be unhappy. The material was cut from a dress she had brought just now. It was sewn into a small cloth bag with 2 ropes tied to it. It looked very similar to the coat Xiao Caihuan had given her before. The only difference was the exquisite pattern on it. Xiao Wanru closed the outer mouth of the bag with a needle and thread, and then sealed it skillfully. She was good at needlework. In her last life, she would do needlework and embroidery when she was free. Miss, there is no protective talisman in it. Yujia's needlework was not as good as Xiao Wanru's, so she couldn't help her at this time, so she reminded her. The reason why the protective talisman was called a protective talisman was that there was a small paper talisman inside, and then it was sealed in the outer mouth of the bag, so that it could be kept for a longer time. You don't have to put it. It's just for the appearance. If third sister asks, you can pull it a little to show her. Xiao Wanru said and continued to seal the bag. Miss, are you so sure that third miss will ask about this protective talisman? Yujia asked in confusion. Since the protective talisman had been given away, how could it be possible that third miss would ask about it again? When she was in Jingshin Monastery, she had seen many people asking for protective talismans, but she had never heard that third miss would ask third miss to show it to see if it was lost. She will definitely ask about it and ask third miss to show it, Xiao Wanru said with a smile and a little laziness in her manner. She sealed the bag, turned to Yujia, blinked her watery eyes, and said, "You said before that you also drew a protective talisman. Now I ask you to draw a symbol on the outer mouth of the bag, okay?" The outer mouth of the bag containing the protective talisman was also different. Some of them were specially designed with marks. When Yujia was in Jingshin Monastery, she had really drawn it for the master of Jingshin Monastery and could draw 1 or 2 strokes according to the marks. "Miss, the drawing on the protective talisman is more exquisite. I can't draw it." However, Yujia felt that she couldn't draw the protective talisman before, so she shook her head. At that time, she took a few more glances at it and thought that it was really beautiful. "You just need to draw the middle one first. I'll draw the lines on the sides," Xiao Wanru said with a smile. She also took a few more glances at it at that time and could roughly draw a few lines. It was enough to have such a similar shape, but it didn't have to be exactly the same. The master and the servant worked together. In a short while, a protective talisman was completely finished. Looking at the protective talisman that was placed at the back window to dry, Yujia looked around with a very interesting expression. "Miss, it looks a little similar, but it's definitely not. I don't think it's very effective. If someone takes a closer look, they will definitely find something." Yujia tilted her head and looked at it again, feeling that it didn't look like it. As long as it looks a little similar, it's enough. If someone can find it with a closer look, then they don't have to look at it carefully, Xiao Wanru said meaningfully with a smile. She only needed it to look like it, but it didn't look like it in fact. If it was exactly the same, it would be hard to explain. But now it was just right. Sure enough, things happened very quickly. On the day Xiao Wanru was going to have the portrait, Xiao Yenru was also the second painter, but the two of them were not the same painter. Because the time was the same, the two of them went out together. Unexpectedly, they met Wang Yusin at the gate of the Imperial Palace. She seemed to have just come back from outside the Imperial Palace. When she saw the Xiao sisters, she immediately walked over. She first called them affectionately, "First Miss Xiao," and then called them extremely coldly, "Fifth Miss Xiao." Xiao Wanru was not surprised by Wang Yusin's behavior. She just raised her eyebrows and looked at her. She stopped and did not go forward. "Miss Wang, where are you from?" Xiao Yenru asked with a smile. "I just came back from outside." "Come here." Wang Yusin took Xiao Yenru's hand and looked at Xiao Wanru warily. Seeing that Xiao Wanru did not come over, she rolled her eyes at her and said in a low voice, "I got 2. As she said, she took out an object from her bosom and quickly stuffed it into Xiao Yenru's hand. Then she looked at Xiao Wanru and was satisfied when she saw that Xiao Wanru's attention did not seem to be on her. "This is for you," Wang Yusin said in a low voice. "You got it at a high price." "I don't want it," Xiao Yenru refused in a low voice. "How can you not want it?" "I got it at a high price and with great effort." "There are only 2 of them, one for you and one for me," Wang Yusin said. She closed Xiao Yenru's hands hard and asked her to hold the object in her hands tightly. "But Xiao Yenru still looked a little hesitant. "First Miss Xiao, you don't have to be so polite." "We don't have to be so polite," Wang Yusin said with a smile. She proudly raised her eyebrows at Xiao Wanru, who was beside her, and said provocatively, "I got one for you because we get along well. I won't help others even if they kneel down and beg me." After that, she rolled her eyes at Xiao Wanru vaguely and said goodbye to Xiao Yenru with a smile. Seeing her leave, Xiao Yenru turned to look at Xiao Wanru with a smile and said softly, "Fifth sister, do you like this?" She stretched out her hand, and a delicate protective talisman lay quietly in her palm. Chapter 744. Fifth Sister, this is for you. Xiao Yanru said softly while reaching out to pull out another protective talisman from around her neck. I already have one. I have one too. Thank you for your kindness, big sister. Xiao Wanru said with a gentle smile. Where did you get it, fifth miss? Xiao Yanru asked in surprise. Third sister gave it to me. I've worn it since a long time ago. Xiao Wanru pulled out a thread from around her neck. She didn't pull out all the protective talismans inside like Xiao Yanru did. She only exposed a little bit of the protective talisman to show that she was telling the truth, and then put it back. Although they were at the gate of the palace, they were leaning against a corner inside. When Xiao Yanru took it out just now, she deliberately moved to the inside, and Xiao Wanru also moved to the inside. If she took out the protective talisman at this time, no one would see it. After all, such behavior was a little rude. Third sister gave it to you. Is it this one? I heard that this protective talisman is very efficacious and different from the ones outside. I got one before and wanted to get one for you. Xiao Yanru also put her protective talisman back and explained to Xiao Wanru with a smile. Thank you for your kindness, big sister. Xiao Wanru said softly, Big sister, I'll go there first. I heard that my painter is impatient. If I go there late, I'm afraid that he will be scolded. The beauties in the talent show didn't dare to offend the painter. If the painter didn't draw well, the loss would outweigh the gain. Actually, even if it was a painting of the same person, different painters would paint it differently. It wasn't that they were completely different, but with just a few small changes, a person with outstanding looks could become ordinary, and an ordinary person could become more lively and fresh. In her last life, Xiao Wanru had also been a painter. However, she was very timid and her paintings were very sincere. Even if someone wanted to give her some money and ask her to make them more beautiful, she did not dare to decorate them and did what she should do. For this reason, she was ridiculed by several misses from noble families and said that it was no wonder that she was driven out and that she was a useless unlucky person. Fifth sister. Xiao Yanru actually wanted to talk to Xiao Wanru and find out if the protective talisman Xiao Wanru was wearing was the one given by Xiao Caihuan. However, Xiao Wanru turned around and left after saying that. She couldn't stop her even if she wanted to. Moreover, even if she could stop her, it would arouse Xiao Wanru's suspicion. She looked at Xiao Wanru's back with gloomy eyes. She would do it, but not by herself. She couldn't make any mistake during the consort selection, so she would never do it by herself. Since there was a ready-made person beside her, why should she take the risk of being discovered and deal with Xiao Wanru by herself? Xiao Wanru was not easy to deal with. But was the protective talisman on her real? After fighting against Xiao Wanru for a few times, Xiao Yanru absolutely did not dare to underestimate Xiao Wanru. Miss, why don't we find a chance to check it next time? Seeing that she had been silent, Shuqi knew what she meant, so she suggested after thinking for a while. No need, she will be suspicious. Xiao Yanru waved her hand and walked out slowly. Xiao Wanru had always been vigilant and had been set up several times. If she asked her about the protective talisman again and again, it might backfire. At the moment, it was better not to ask. The protective talisman in her hand fell into her sleeve. It was a good protective talisman, but the two she gave Xiao Caihuan had something added. However, it was blocked by the Buddha incense. Even if Xiao Wanru knew some medicine skills, it would be useless. Moreover, the powder was not native to the Central Plains. Xiao Wanru was only a few years old, so it was impossible for her to know it. What if the protective talisman on the fifth miss is not given by the third miss? Shuqi was also very worried. Like Xiao Yanru, she always felt that Xiao Wanru would find out. Xiao Yanru narrowed her eyes and felt that what she had seen just now should be the real one. Although Xiao Wanru only took out one end, the delicate lines on it should be the lines newly designed by Pushun Nun. It was absolutely real. Thinking of this, the weight in his heart finally fell to the ground. Just take it as it is. Ask Wang Yusen to come over in the evening. Xiao Yanru said. She could be sure that most of it was true, but she was not sure about some of it. Yes, I got it. Shuqi nodded and agreed. The incense had been sent to Miss Wang, and she was waiting for Miss Wang to do it. Whether it succeeded or not, it had something to do with her master. Even if Miss Wang wanted to investigate it, she couldn't be blamed. The two of them chatted for a while, then they left as well. At the gate of the palace, a palace maid, who was sweeping, raised her head, looked in the direction in which the Xiao sisters went out, and then looked in the direction in which Wang Yusen had just gone, and lowered her head to sweep the floor again. If one looked carefully, one would find that the direction in which she swept the floor was no longer as meticulously as before. Instead, she swept forward, which was very similar to the direction in which Wang Yusen had left just now. Xiao Wanru's painter was also a female painter, an old female painter in her 40s or 50s. When she saw Xiao Wanru, her eyes were full of amazement. After looking Xiao Wanru up and down a few times, she immediately showed an appreciative look and smiled. Looking at the list in front of her, she asked, "Fifth Miss Xiao of Duke Xing's mansion?" "Yes," Xiao Wanru said with a smile. She still had a good impression of the female painter in front of her. Although the female painter was not herself in the last life, she seemed to have a shadow of herself when she saw the female painter again after a lifetime. If she hadn't discovered that he was the person who taught her how to paint in her last life, I thought that the first Miss Xiao was the most beautiful one, but it turns out that the fifth Miss Xiao is the most beautiful one. At this moment, I don't suffer a loss. That the female painter said with a smile, even if he would rule the world in the future, even if he was cold and bloodthirsty, she had more treated her differently than ordinary people. Her only regret was that she didn't have any memories of him in her previous life. Duke Xing's mansion. It was said to be a piece of her memory had been forcefully dug out, and the part that was dug out was centered around her. As a result, some of her other memories were also unstable, and some of them were even lost along with it. Therefore, the other female painter proudly came to show off in front of her for a picture album in front of her, and she was also lingered on a plum blossom painted by him, but her thoughts had already drifted away, let alone the first beauty. Could she guess what had happened in the last life so that all the memories about female painter didn't feel regretful anymore? All the memories about him were blurred, and she was inexplicably reborn. Thinking of this, she had never heard of rebirth became more and more brilliant. In a very good mood, she asked Xiao Wanru she would never have believed that this kind of thing had happened. Xiao Wanru sat calmly and elegantly, holding a picture album casually. Came from her ear. This was originally her own request. Reacted after a while and raised her head. If she sat still like this, she was afraid that she would fall asleep. This is already very good. The sunlight shone in from the window, very beautiful, making her feel lazy and sleepy. The female painter praised. She was someone who had been an artist before. She really felt that the fifth Miss Xiao in front of her was the unique portrait of a showgirl didn't necessarily require her to sit in a smile were extremely beautiful. She could choose a suitable angle, very pleasing, and even if she was holding something in her hand, this Miss came to participate in the talent show. The female artist's album of paintings was very good. The female painter felt that all the picture album was open, should be selected. The first picture attracted Xiao Wanru's attention to ponder. Originally, she always felt that there was casually to kill time and that had a direct connection with her and Chu Luchen, but the picture in front of her made her heart palpitate. Fifth Miss, that's all for today. Chu Luchen's painting. You can go back and have a rest. This picture album was not this female painter's, but Chu Luchen's. Put down the brush in her hand before she had time to look at it and nodded with satisfaction. She turned the pages one by one. Although it was only an outline, as expected, it could be seen that a beautiful girl was leaning against the wide wicker chair by the window, and her heart looking at a picture album with her head slightly tilted. She blinked her watery eyes. She looked quiet, and her long eyelashes fluttered twice to hide the shyness in her eyes. The female painter turned her head and saw that Xiao Wanru had closed her eyes and really fell asleep. In what way did he protect her in the last life? She smiled for a moment. In this life, he without waking her up again. She quietly packed up her things, walked out of the studio, sour and inexplicable softness, who was waiting outside. After her rebirth, is asleep. She had always been rational and even hard-hearted. But now that she thought of him, Blissful Bookshelf, she had a feeling that she couldn't control herself. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey. What happened in her last life was just a pretext, a pretext to cut open her heart. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.